to this.
All right, good to go.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Rob Donnelly, and I'm editor of the Canberra Disability Review here at Advocacy for Inclusion, or AFI for short. I'm a male with buzz-cut, short, sandy hair and a fair bit of grey, to be honest, in the mix, and I'm wearing a red jumper over a cream-coloured plain top. I warmly welcome you all to this afternoon's opening ceremony for the International Day of People with Disability, or I-Day. Thank you for joining us as we celebrate the ACT's community-led and controlled I-Day celebrations here in Canberra. International Day of People with Disability is held every year on the 3rd of December. It's a United Nations observed day that recognises the rights and contributions of people with disability. In the ACT, we treat I-Day as a year-round effort. We work with communities, businesses, arts, sports, education, and government so that people with disability can participate in everyday life. The highlight is the 3rd of December. The ACT is the first jurisdiction in Australia where I-Day is community controlled. People with disability lead the design, decisions, and delivery. AFI hosts the I-Day Steering Committee with Women with Disabilities ACT, and the ACT government supports the program. To begin today's proceedings, I'm honoured to invite respected Ngunnawal elder Uncle Bradley to perform a traditional welcome to country.
Thanks, Rob. Yuma, everybody. Yuma is how you say hello or g'day in the Ngunnawal language, and it's Yuma is a gift to you all from our elders. Burunda Gulanga Bradley Jiribich Bell. My connection to country is through the Bell family of the Ngunnawal tribe. Uh, of the Ngunnawal tribe. Jiribich is my cultural name and speaks of the relationship that I and the red-belly black share with country. This relationship has been in place since the first sunrise. Winu. Winu, thank you for the respect you've shown by asking me to provide the Ngunnawal welcome to country. It's truly an honour, and I wish everyone a Yardong day. And all that we ask in return is that you treat each other with kindness. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge all elders, past and present, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and our non-Aboriginal people here today. Bullinjima, Murrinjima, Budinjima. I'd like to acknowledge the Ngarigu, the Walgaloo, the Wiradjuri, the Gundungara and the Yuan. And I acknowledge all of my First Nations people and I show them Jin Jamara respect. I also extend that acknowledgement out to each and every one here today online and I show you respect for the contribution that you make to each and every one of our lives from day to day. My ancestors have lived on this country for many thousands of years. Our roots run deep in this earth, from the mountains to the life-giving rivers. For thousands of years, we've had strong elders leading us, looking after us, managing their own lives and their families' lives through some tough times, but also through some times of joy in the celebration of culture. It's important that all Australians understand the intrinsic and woven connections we as Aboriginal people have to our land and how our cultural practices, responsibilities have cared for and nurtured our environment over thousands of years. This cultural knowledge has been handed down through the generations and has supported us socially, spiritually, and culturally. I think as Australians, we all want to see healthy country, healthy water that all can enjoy and value. Healthy country, healthy water gives you healthy people. Please keep this in mind. Our Aboriginal tradition is that when a person or group enters the land of another, they acknowledge that and seek permission from the people of that land they're entering. This ensures spiritual and cultural safety for those seeking permission, as well as showing cultural respect for the people of that land. And we maintain this for two reasons. Firstly, out of the respect of the ancient living culture of this land. Secondly, as a part of sharing the history of this land as we move forward together, reconciliation in practice. We, the Ngunnawal, hosted gatherings for our neighbouring nations to come together to deal with important business and for ceremonial occasions. You may not be aware, but Canberra, Gambra in our language, means meeting place, and it's been a place of many wildflowers. Our Ngunnawal ancestors believed in the importance of people gathering together for the purpose of building relationships, knowledge, and to celebrate the gift of heritage and history in which now we all share as Australians. I'd like to welcome you now all now in Ngunnawal language. Darawa, Nuna, Darawa, Nunawal, Yangu, Narawiri, Dunimanya, Ngunnawal Wadi, Darawa Wadi, Darawa, Nuna, Narambanya, Murrumbidgee, Marangarra Jinyilla, Gulumbananye, Narragansawali, Yiri, Yarrabin, Inyan, Nana, Yarrabai, Yangu, Yumulandi, Jan Yimaba. This is Ngunnawal country. Today we're all gathering together on Ngunnawal country, online. This country is my ancestral spiritual homeland. We are keeping the pathways of all of our ancestors alive by all of us walking together as one. In the famous words of my ancestors and my elders, you all may leave your footprints here on the land of the Ngunnawal. Please tread lightly because someone will be following in your footprints from behind. Welcome and thank you for this opportunity to address you all. Very much appreciated. And welcome.
So thank you, Uncle Bradley, very much for your beautiful and warm words of welcome to country. And we really appreciate your making time to spend with us and to welcome us today. So thank you so much, Uncle Bradley. I also want to acknowledge everyone who's joining us today with lived experience of disability. AFI is a disabled people's organisation. This means the majority of the board and staff are people with disability. The expertise, the perspectives, and the experiences of people with disability is at the heart of everything we do. I want to thank you all. I want to thank all of you for joining us today and for being part of AFI. And also acknowledge our partners, especially Women with Disabilities ACT, as well as ACT Down Syndrome and Intellectual Disability ACT. Before we continue, I'll go through some housekeeping. As this is a webinar, your microphone and video are turned off to assist with the smooth running of the event. We invite you to engage via the chat function. We are recording today's ceremony and will also be using images from today in our work. If you have any concerns, please let our team know in the chat. Harry and Carla are on hand for any support you need. I also want to go through some accessibility pointers for this event. Our Auslan interpreters will be spotlighted and should be visible on the screen with the panel at all times. Thanks to Kelly and Susanna for interpreting the event for us. Live captioning can also be accessed directly in Zoom or via a separate screen. To see the captions in Zoom, depending on the device you use, you can select CC at the bottom or top of your screen. Please remember to speak at a rate where our interpreters can keep up in support of making this an accessible session for all of us. Discussions about disinformation and hate speech can be distressing, so we're including some links to organisations and services that offer support in the chat. Now I want to speak about why iDay matters and what makes this year so important. Today marks 12 months since iDay was handed into community control by the ACT government. Our vision is that iDay is strongly supported, anticipated, and loved by people with disability throughout the Territory. This means people with disability feel they own our day and are in real and practical control of the direction of the celebrations, campaigns, and events. This year's theme is Halting Hate, Finding Kindness, Rebooting Diversity, Disability Inclusion, and Equity in the 2020s. At the heart of this theme is the idea of building a welcoming community. This responds to many issues, but in particular, some of the hate speech and disinformation directed towards people with disability in more recent times. A welcoming community isn't passive. It actively intervenes early, shares facts, designs for access, and stands up together. It's about replacing hate with shared norms of dignity, truth, safety, and belonging. Today's opening ceremony is the start of a full afternoon of dialogue and action. After this ceremony concludes, we'll take a short break before our main dialogue session begins at 1 p.m. This dialogue will tackle the hard questions. What are the real-world consequences of rising ableist hate speech? How do we stop the tide of disinformation? What responsibilities do governments, businesses, and civil society share in defending inclusion? We'll hear from academics and advocates who are resisting hate and modelling resilience. We'll explore practical commitments and build towards a shared declaration that turns today's dialogue into action. You can also make your own commitment today in the event by uploading one of the wallpapers we'll put into the chat as your screensaver for the event. These words reflect the shared values of respect, equity, diversity, kindness, inclusion, and access that we share in a progressive city. To upload in Zoom, go to Video, Background and Effects, press the plus button, and upload the image. The event you are experiencing today has been shaped by a community committee, and we acknowledge their work and commitment. At various times, we've been helped by Ravi, Taryn, Louise, Lillian, and Fee, and our co-chairs, Kat Reid and Craig Wallace from Women with Disability ACT and Advocacy for Inclusion. I encourage you all to stay with us for the full afternoon. You'll find the complete program and session details in the chat and on our event page. Now, we are delighted to have journalist and ABC Canberra presenter Saskia Marvin leading today's proceedings. We'd also like to extend a very personal thank you to Saskia for stepping into this role at the last minute in place of Ellen Fanning, who wanted to be here but was called away for a statewide broadcast program on the ABC. Saskia, over to you. We'd invite you to provide a short visual description of your appearance to help with the accessibility of the event.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Bradley, for your welcome to country. That was beautiful. And I'm very pleased to be your poor man's Ellen Fanning, as I said to Craig when he asked me to assist with this event. I'm very honoured to be here. I am a woman. I have light brown hair. At the moment, I'm sporting a front fringe, which I think is getting a little bit too long. I have blue eyes and I'm wearing a blue shirt today. You might be able to just see in the corner of the screen, I'm wearing my iDay pin, which was designed by Oliver Mills. And I hope that these are easy to find. I think they've been around for a few years, but I really like it. So I'll be wearing this all of today. It's wonderful to be with you today. International Day of People with a Disability is more than just today, the 3rd of December. It is a commitment to recognising rights, celebrating contributions, and building what we're calling a welcoming community. The theme for this year's iDay, Halting Hate, Finding Kindness, Rebooting Diversity, Disability, Inclusion, and Equity in the 2020s, speaks directly to the moment that we are in right now. It's interesting, while disability pride and participation has grown, we've also seen public rhetoric open the door to quite awful things, casual ableism and coordinated hate. We will be speaking about that during today's session. Today marks a collective reboot. The iDay team are inviting us to recommit to diversity, disability, inclusion, and equity, and for it not to be a tokenistic corporate slogan, but something that we actually do every day in our behaviours, our rules, and our relationships. I don't know if anyone here is a fan of the show Ted Lasso. It's one of my favourite television shows. And the theme of today reminds me a little bit of a quote that is shared in that show. It's a Walt Whitman quote. He says, "Be curious, not judgmental." And I think being curious is like being kind. You ask questions of people, you want to learn more about them. And being judgmental is often a little bit like being hateful, and it can lead to that type of attitude. So I also would like to add to today's theme, rebooting, halting hate and finding kindness, and say, let's be curious, not judgmental. Now, my next guest, the star of today, he needs no introduction. Michael Theo joins us. Michael, I will read out your introduction anyway, because you've had so many fabulous achievements, and I hope I don't embarrass you by now listing all of them. But Michael stars in the comedy series Austen on the ABC, which was filmed right here in Canberra. In 2025, he was nominated for a Silver Logie Best Actor in Comedy. He also received a nomination for the ACTA Awards for Best Acting in a Comedy in the same year. It's been a big year for Michael. And prior to Austen, he was the breakout star of the series Love on the Spectrum. He appeared in the first 2 seasons of the show. As well as his TV success, Michael has guest starred on numerous podcasts, including Justin Long's Life is Short, Ricky Lake's The High Life, and Australia's hugely popular podcast series, The Imperfects, which is one of my favourites as well. He is a passionate animal activist, a nature lover, an avid railway enthusiast, and he continues to champion inclusion, self-acceptance, and the celebration of neurodiversity. Outside of his creative work, Michael is also the ambassador for Wobble, which is an app designed to help neurodivergent people build friendships and social connections. He joins us this morning from Sydney. Please welcome Michael Theo. Hi, Michael.
Hi Saskia, how you doing?
I'm doing so well, and I'm really excited. I've been excited all morning about the opportunity to meet you. You're quite the celebrity, so thank you for spending your day with us. We're very lucky to have
Pleasure.
you. Can you tell me, Michael, why do we need a day like today?
Yes, we do need a day like today. I'll explain why. December 3rd is the one day of the year that the focus is on people with disabilities. Today also recognizes that not all disabilities are visible and that there are many different voices in this community. But International Day of People with Disability is also an opportunity for us to be seen in the media and highlight the access and other barriers that we experience in today's world. And we also need to think about people with disabilities, not just today, but also every day of the year, and also to see those people on television and in the media, especially neurodivergent people. And also by thinking about people with disabilities every day of the year instead of just today, it will hopefully one day get people to see that we're not so different because
Absolutely.
we truly aren't.
And I'd like to thank you, Michael, for what you've done in increasing visibility and being such a wonderful voice for neurodivergent people. You are so beloved, not just here in Australia, but internationally as well. I mentioned that you have a bit of a connection to Canberra. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Alex, that is a very simple question to answer. I do indeed have a connection to Canberra, and I'll explain why. Because that's where we filmed Austen, both seasons 1 and 2, apart from London, of course. And I'll explain how it was filmed there. It was just filmed the same way that every other television production is filmed, using television cameras and a cast and crew, of course. There's no other way to film a television show anywhere. And also, I have quite a few friends in Canberra and at least one cousin. And there are some other things about Canberra. I'm actually not really aware of any stereotypes about Canberra, but the only stereotype that I seem to know is that it's where a lot of people who work in government live. But to me, that doesn't seem like much of a stereotype. That seems more like for practical reasons. Why live anywhere else if you work in government? Living in Canberra is the most sensible way to go about it if you work in government. And also, some other reasons of my connection to Canberra is after filming 2 seasons of Austen there, it kind of feels like a little home away from home. And Canberra is no different to places like Perth or Sydney or Melbourne. It's a great city and it's a great place to be. So I wouldn't say it's boring because think about it. It has the Tidbinbilla Nature Reserve
Yes, it
and
does.
Lake Burley Griffin because during the production of the first season, one of my co-stars, Sally Phillips, and we were taking a walk around the entire lake. We were trying to do the entire lap around the whole lake itself, but we've learned the hard way that it takes about 7 hours to do that full loop. So we had no choice but to get an Uber back.
I really like that you attempted to do the full loop. I've never done that, Michael, and I've lived in Canberra for 3 years. So
Well,
perhaps you're more of a Canberran than I am.
I don't know about that, but I also do know that Canberra is pretty easy to get around if you live there for long enough, but I still use Google Maps because I don't live there on a day-to-day basis.
Hmm.
But I have also heard that it's quite cold in winter and quite hot in summer.
Yes.
So the one thing that I'm not too fond of is it's not on the coast. But Canberra is still a great place nonetheless, so therefore it's not boring.
You're absolutely right, Michael. Thank you for endorsing Canberra, but don't tell too many people because then everyone will want to come here and we'll lose our beautiful peace and quiet. Michael, I want
Yeah.
to talk about this year's theme with you, halting
Hmm.
hate, finding kindness. What in
Yes.
your life and your career has taught you about the power of love and kindness?
Well, being on this path has taught me quite a few things. We are all searching for love and kindness in our own way because we all want to be loved, valued, and accepted, right? Because, well, look at Love on the Spectrum, for example. The viewers got to follow a group of people, young people on the spectrum searching for love. And I was one of those people. It can take a lot of work and numerous attempts to find love and respect, but in the end, it's worth it because everything takes an amount of work, right? That's correct. Because it took me quite a long time to find love. I've been there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have found it. And a great way to start is to love and respect yourself first. And there are lessons for everyone in this to take away. But also, self-doubt and the inner critic in ourselves are always going to be there amongst us. But we should never let that from holding us back because why would you want to let your self-doubt hold you back from being loved and respected and valued by others? Because if you encounter someone that won't love or respect you, that's not a reflection of you, that's a reflection on them. It's their loss. So you're better off cutting your losses and find a crowd that will love and accept you unconditionally.
Michael, I think that you're incredibly wise and also incredibly brave, and you showed us your bravery by putting yourself out there for all of Australia to see. I'm so
Thank
pleased to
you.
hear that you have found love. You deserve
Hmm.
all of the love that comes your way
Thank
in
you.
all of its different forms. Michael, on I Day, what is your message to us here and as you help us to open our proceedings today?
My message to everyone on I Day is welcome a discussion about hate speech and disinformation, especially given what is going on in today's world. And also, today is an opportunity to show that we can respect each other and do things differently in our own way. But also, it is actually a really positive thing to see I Day being controlled by the community and also people with disabilities. But the question is, these people with disabilities, I prefer to see them as just challenged because not all disabilities are visible. Some are invisible. And we don't want special treatment or special needs. We just want to be loved, valued, and accepted by others, family, friends alike, and to be included in things and being given a chance at employment, for example. Because how can we prove our potential if we're not given the chance? And also, here's another thing I want everyone to take away and also learn from this. If you have friends that really love and value you, there's something that you should live by. Hold on to your friends because friendship is just as valuable as love. It's something worth fighting for and worth wanting to pursue. And so, last thing I'd like to add to this is thank you for inviting me to open iDay here in the Australian Capital Territory. It really is a huge honor.
Michael, thank you for joining us. You
My
speak
pleasure.
so eloquently. I can see
Thank you.
Craig giving you a big wave of applause. And in the chat, I'm just looking at the chat now
Thank
as
you.
well. People are talking about the reasons why they like Canberra. Sam says, I like Canberra mostly, except for the access barriers by footpath, but it's a lot better than other places access wise, says
Yeah.
Sam. And there's a little bit of conversation about that in the chat.
Mm.
Sam also says, so true, Michael. And we can talk about what we do as a community to counter hate
Yes,
speech and disinformation.
exactly.
Sam says, I'm tired of hearing that autism is caused by Panadol, for example. I think, yeah, everyone's sick of hearing disinformation like that,
I
Sam,
am too, because that is actually one of the most absurd claims I have ever heard.
isn't it? Yeah.
Because autism isn't really a curse, it's a kind of a blessing. Well, in my case, it is, but it all depends on the individual as well,
Mm.
because everyone's different.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Michael,
But
thank you again. Oh, sorry, did you want
my
to say something
pleasure.
else?
Thank you. I was also going to say, cherish the people in your life and never take what you have for granted, because it could be a lot worse.
Absolutely. You're incredibly wise, Michael. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with
Thanks.
us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on. And for everyone in the ACT, I salute you.
We salute you right back, Michael. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Saskia. My pleasure. Thank you. Thanks
Uh,
for having me on.
Everybody, it is now 12:35 and we have come to a key moment in today's ceremony. Following on from the success of last year, we've invited our community to contribute to iDay through words, sounds, images that speak to what disability, inclusion and belonging mean to them. This year's call for entries invited creative expression around the theme Halting Hate, Finding Kindness. We asked for contributions that explore what kindness looks like, how to build belonging, and the positive actions that we can take to reduce barriers in our community. The response has been extraordinary: poetry, visual art, photography, and personal reflections. To officially launch this year's showcase, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Minister for Disability, Ms. Suzanne Orr. Welcome, Minister, and could you please start by providing a short visual description of your appearance to help with the accessibility?
Yeah, thank you, Saskia. I'm a female of an age sometimes I don't like to admit, but we'll call it middle-aged, the younger middle-aged. I have shoulder-length brown hair. I'm wearing glasses, a green jacket, and a white t-shirt. And I'm sitting in my office because it's a sitting day, which means I don't get to leave the building.
Yes, unfortunately for you, there doesn't seem to be too many windows there, but thank you, Minister. Maybe there's one off to your shoulder.
There's one to the side, but I think on the camera that would make it a little bit too bright to see me.
Yes. I'd love to hear from you a little bit about the significance of iDay being community controlled for the first year.
Yeah. If I can just, in answering the question, I'll just also like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Ngunnawal people and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. and all people and family with a connection to the country of this region. It's really important to me to always acknowledge that, because I'm also the Minister for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Affairs. And I think it's very exciting to see the community control of I-Day here in the ACT. This is something that we're very proud to be the first jurisdiction to do, to put the celebrations and the opportunity for organising and awareness raising through this day back within the community's hands, so that they can drive and really put forward the issues that are important to them, that they want to discuss.
What about this year's theme, Halting Hate and Finding Kindness? What does that mean to you?
Oh, it's a really simple, quick sentence, but it's got a lot behind it. And I'm going to try and speak slower. I do speed up when I get excited or enthusiastic about a topic, but I always have to remind myself to slow down, especially when we have an interpreter for Auslan. So if I get too fast, please just tell me.
Susanna is laughing.
So going back to the Halting Hate, Finding Kindness theme, it's a really important one given where we find ourselves in the world. And I think it's already been mentioned, a lot of the broader discussions that are out there, which are not helpful in being inclusive and creating a kind world. And I think a really important part of countering that and making sure that those sorts of views don't take hold across our wider community is actually celebrating the kindness and finding the kindness, and remembering that we can come together, and that we have a lot of good to give and a lot of strength within joining together in doing that.
We're about to see a special showcase video, which is a wonderful compilation of creative expression and community voice. Why is it so important that we organise things like this and share them in settings such as this?
Yeah, it's really important, because we need to hear from the people whose everyday lives it is that are impacted by these events, and coming together in a format and in a way that everyone can be included in is part of that sharing and part of realising that wealth of information and understanding that comes from it.
Minister, thank you for being here to officially launch the showcase video that we're about to watch. I really appreciate your contributions and your presence today. It does mean a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, and apologies in advance because it's a sitting day. I will have to run off before the event ends today, but I wish you all the best with it, and we'd just like to acknowledge all the work that the committee's done in putting this together.
Beautiful. Thank you for making time in a busy day, sitting day, Minister Suzanne Orr. I think it's time for us to now watch this fabulous showcase video. Shall we? It's about 10 minutes long, everybody, so sit back, relax, and I hope you feel inspired by what you're about to see.
Welcome to the Words, Sounds and Images Art Showcase for the UN International Day of People with Disability in the ACT. We invited people with disability to respond to this year's community focus for I-Day, Halting Hate, Finding Kindness, Rebooting Diversity, Equity and Inclusion for the 2020s. We invited the artists to provide us with a message about their artwork and what it means to them. This is a selection of the artwork received. You can enjoy more of the artwork in the Canberra Weekly I-Day Celebration Pass, published for free and circulated throughout Canberra, and also in the digital edition. Happy Flower. This is Happy Flower by Saffron Snell, who says, "This painting is called The Happy Flower. It has smiley lips, a button nose and whiskers. It also has big, blue, glittery eyelashes. The flower stands out from the others, but it is happy about this. The stripes are big, bold and colourful like the flower. It makes it happy to see the world can be colourful too. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. Alexander Den Heijer. The Goat Paintings. These are the goat paintings by Heidi Smith. Heidi says, "My greatest of all time GOAT paintings are inspired by Molly Wobbles, a baby goat who survived falling from a truck on its way to the abattoir. She was found on the side of the road and rehabilitated. Molly's subsequent head injury means not everyone will consider adopting her, even though she is GOAT. Unnamed Crochet Circles of Diversity. Welcome to this unnamed work by Crystal Vincentico. The artist says, "In the centre I have placed a black circle that is being surrounded by white circles to represent the following mindsets I have observed in our community and on social media recently: black and white thinking and an us versus them mentality. I then slowly incorporate other colours that ultimately results in new connections being formed, new colours and new patterns being created with gaps and imperfections, but still always connected with each other. Diversity does not make a community weaker. It does not drown out or remove the original white and black colours. It just becomes a stronger foundation for all of the other colours, groups and patterns to thrive off of. At the end of the day, it is not an us versus them, because we are all part of the same race, the human race." Think Punk. This is Think Punk by Sasha Wilson. Sasha Wilson says, "We make room for all of us when we embrace our rules of punk. Number 1, be yourself. Number 2, let others be themselves." Stimpunks Foundation. Sasha loves fashion, colour and pop culture, especially One Direction, but she also loves horror movies and writing scary stories, which often surprises people. She enjoys seeing people like Lady Gaga who express themselves in different ways. Punk is one of the aesthetics that Sasha was interested in exploring in her art. Sasha loves to dance and often puts on Just Dance videos on YouTube and sings and dances with her support workers for exercise and for fun. Is it time? Our next piece is from Robin Davis and is accompanied by a poem, Is It Time? It's time to come out from behind the tree. Do I have the courage to be seen and free? Watching and waiting, sensing danger lurk. If I stay here long enough, will the shark desert? Both swimming around in our instinctual fate. If I stand my ground, will courage abate? Difference is the label, fear and ignorance abet. Like any fish out of water, death is the threat. Only knowledge and kindness together will guide a shark in the wild, trapped by the tide. A beautiful plant. Our final piece is a written work, A Beautiful Plant by Bryce Jarvis. Just be normal, they say. Stop being weird and everything will be okay. My mind filled with confusion, anxiety and worry, thinking I have to constantly say, I'm sorry. They say I am too much, or even worse, not quite enough. They say my mind is all tangled, or my pathways are rough. Labelled by ignorance and myths that confine, blissfully ignoring the brilliance that is my mind. I am not a puzzle that's missing one piece. That being said, my brain is simply never at peace. My focus may wander, my senses will flare, but inside of my mind are wonders beyond compare. All I crave is acceptance to help me grow. A little understand and kindness is all you need to sow. If I had just one wish that you could grant, I'd ask you to help me flourish from a seed to a beautiful plant.
Bravo.
Thank you to all of the artists. You can find all of the works, including a longer and powerfully written piece by Jess Knott, in the Canberra Weekly iDay edition. iDay is a community initiative organised by Advocacy for Inclusion and Women with Disabilities, with support from the ACT Government and Hand Across Canberra.
Thank you to all of the artists who contributed to that fabulous showcase video. And those words there at the end from Bryce Jarvis are just beautiful and quite moving. I'm going to throw now to Craig Wallace, who will introduce the next speakers.
Thank you, Saskia, and welcome to all of you. I'm Craig Wallace, and I'm the Head of Policy at Advocacy for Inclusion. I'm a short man who is balding, who is wearing a white shirt and a First Nations tie, who uses a wheelchair. It's my pleasure to introduce two members of our community steering committee for iDay this year, who have also stepped up to be community spokespeople for the day. They are Ravi Krishnamurthy. Ravi is a leader whose dedication to disability rights has made a national impact. As president of the Australian Multicultural Action Network, he has created spaces for individuals with disability, particularly from multicultural backgrounds, to lead discussions and influence policies, programs and public attitudes. He has also worked with the ACT Disability Health Strategy reference group and was a winner of the Leader in Inclusion category within the 2024 ACT Chief Minister's Inclusion Awards. I also want to introduce Taran Lee, who will provide our closing reflection and look to the future. Taran is a youth advocate who brings enthusiasm, ideas and energy to the steering committee. Taran is part of a number of committees, including the peak body for LGBTQIA+ youth, the Youth Pride Network, and an advocate in the prevention of gender-based violence, youth advisory group led by the Department of Education. It's been a pleasure for us in AFI to have worked with you and have seen the way that you've stepped up. There's been media interviews today. There's been podcasts. There's been lots of things that we've asked of you and from you. And your work has shaped the events that everybody's experiencing and has seen today. So thank you for your ideas. I'll now invite Ravi to start off with a closing reflection, and then if you could pass to Taryn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Craig. And it's my honor to receive such a warm introduction from you. Thank you again. We just saw that showcase. It was full of, artwork. We just watched what a testament it is to the creativity, the resilience, and hope within our community. It was quite fantastic. From a beautiful flower, a little goat story, a crochet circle of diversity. Think punk. Is it time? A beautiful plant. Every single showcase item was so fantastic. It's my honor here to introduce myself. I'm Ravi Krishnamurthy. I'm the member of IDA steering committee, and I also contribute across range of other councils, committees, and other multicultural sectors. I would like to give a brief visual description about myself. I am a brown man with a black hair and black eyes, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm wearing a blue and white collarless button shirt, which gives me a neat, approachable, and professional appearance. I would like to reflect on the work of the last 12 months we have done in the IDA steering committee and across the Advocacy for Inclusion board. We've strengthened the community-controlled relationship, supported the first year of fully community-run IDA in the ACT, ensuring people with disabilities shape the priorities, the messaging, and decision-making throughout the planning cycle. Advanced public conversations in disability inclusion, we helped craft the agenda for the flagship event, Halting Hate, Finding Kindness, amplifying the themes of hate speech, misinformation, employment and mental health, and violence prevention to shift the public narrative toward dignity and truth. We promoted multicultural and intersectional perspectives. As a designated spokesperson, brought CAL community insights into the steering committee work, strengthening the cross-community understanding and promoting shared learning across disability and multicultural sectors. We have expanded year-round impact beyond 3rd December. As Michael Theo said just now, supported the development of the inaugural IDA declaration and 364-day legacy focus, embedding the actions, commitments, and community engagement activities. And it continues long after just even today. We have enhanced the visibility through the media and partnerships, contributed to major outreach efforts, including the Canberra Weekly feature you all would have witnessed most recently, the arts showcase, the podcasts, the public messaging, and elevating the disability voices and positioning the IDA as a mainstream citywide inclusion initiative. This work has only been possible because of the commitment of so many people, the steering committee members, volunteers, community organizations, and everyone who has participated in events, contributed to these ideas and taken action to build a more inclusive ACT. Thank you once again, and I'll now hand over to Taryn Lee to share some thoughts about the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi. My name is Taryn Lee, and I'm also a member of the IDA steering committee. I've got a black shirt on, I'm wearing a sunflower lanyard and a medical necklace. I'm a young adult and Singaporean and fair-skinned. As we look ahead, I want to share what gives me hope and what I believe we can achieve together. IDA is an opportunity to reflect on the progress that we have made in championing the rights and inclusion of people with disability. However, as a young person, I'm equally focused on the world we are still building. I hope for my generation and future generations to live and grow up in a world where hate isn't accepted and we treat each other with kindness. We want to live in a world that embeds it. We want to live in a world that embeds respect, kindness, and equity. Even though the world will be run by today's generation eventually, it is up to all of society to create that culture and ensure that young people can become leaders in a truly inclusive environment. This year's theme, Halting Hate, Finding Kindness, isn't just for today. It's a it's a commitment for every day of the year. We invite everyone watching to think about one positive action you can take, one barrier you can help remove, one way you can build belonging in your workplace, your school, your sporting club, or your neighborhood. A welcoming community defends dignity. It intervenes when hate appears. It designs for access from the start. It stands up together. This is what we're building, and we invite you to be a part of it. For those joining us for the dialogue session beginning at 1 p.m., we'll continue this conversation with panels, discussions, and practical commitments. For those concluding your IDA participation here, thank you for being part of this opening ceremony.
Thank you, Taryn. Thank you, Ravi. Taryn, I will just mention, had their very first radio interview this morning. So well done, and thank you so much for being a very important young voice in the community. Lovely to have you and Ravi part of today's session as well, and many more radio interviews to come, I think. I'll pass on now back to Rob. He'll give us a little bit of an update as to where we're going from here. Rob?
Terrific. Thank you, Saskia, and thank you to Ravi and Taryn for that really powerful words and sharing. We are concluding the opening ceremony now. For those continuing with us, we'll reconvene at 1 p.m. for our dialogue session. So in the meantime, we have a bit of a break, a chance to catch a breath, and I encourage all of you to enjoy iDay 2025. Thank you.
We might break for 5 minutes, I think, just to give people a decent break. So you're welcome to turn your cameras off and your audio off, but we'll reconvene in 5.
Hello, welcome back, everyone. Everyone's starting to trickle back in. For those of you who were with us for the opening ceremony, thank you for staying with us. For those just arriving, welcome to iDay 2025. My name is Saskia Maben, and I'm helping to moderate this session, which is called Facing the Situation We're In. I want to be clear from the very beginning that this will probably not be an easy conversation, but it is an essential one. Michael Theo, our special guest earlier, told us about the importance of having hard conversations, of realizing where hate is coming from, and then what we can do to combat that and change the conversation in society. In the chat, there will soon be a post, some help that is available if this is of use to you. And thank you to everyone who has been contributing to the chat already. We will be keeping an eye on it throughout this next session. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what to expect now for the next hour or so. We've gathered thought leaders from across Australia to confront the rising tide of ableist hate speech, disinformation, and misinformation. This isn't about pointing fingers, it's about surfacing the problem, examining the real consequences of it, and charting the paths forward. So there are a few goals for this session. The first one is to name what's happening. So to look clearly at the forms of hate speech and misinformation that are targeting people with a disability in 2025, and then understand the evidence about whether and how that is escalating. The second goal of this session is to trace the sources and the systems. Where is this content coming from? What platforms, networks, and narratives are driving it? And how does something move from the fringe to the mainstream? The third goal of this session is to understand the why now, what social, political, and technological forces are creating the conditions for this surge in hate speech, and what are the flashpoints that trigger spikes in harmful content. I'll tell you a little bit now about how this session will work. It will be structured as a conversational dialogue rather than individual presentations. So I'll be facilitating the discussion with our expert panelists. I'll introduce them very shortly. Just some quick housekeeping things to get through first. This is a webinar, so your microphone and your video are turned off. However, we absolutely do want to hear from you. So please use the chat, continue to use the chat to post any questions that you might have, any reflections. If you want to share examples from your own lived experience, we really encourage that. And the AFI team are going to be monitoring the chat. So I'll bring selected questions in to the panel as we go. Our Auslan interpreter, Susanna, is here with us right now, will remain spotlighted on the screen, and captions will continue to be available. I'll just ask all of our guests on the panel to please speak at a rate that allows our interpreters and our captioners to keep up. And I need to remind myself to do that too. Now, let's introduce the panel for this session. Each person brings unique expertise and perspective to help us understand the landscape that we are navigating. First, I'd like to introduce Professor Jared Goggin, who is a media and communications researcher at the University of Sydney. He has produced award-winning research in disability and media policy, alongside other contemporary works on digital technology and cultures. Professor Goggin has been described as a central scholar in the mobile communication research community. I'm embarrassing you, Jared. I'm going to keep on singing your praises. He is researching internet histories in Australia and the Asia Pacific, and the implications of audio-visual media for government policy. He is the co-author of Disability in Australia, alongside the late and much missed Christopher Newell. Jared, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Saskia. Hi, everyone.
Our second panellist is Professor Nicole Asquith, who is the National Convener of the Australian Hate Crime Network and Adjunct Professor at the Queensland University of Technology. Along with her colleagues, she's explored ableist violence in a variety of contexts and contributed to the growing scholarship of ableism and its impacts. Nicole, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Dr. Ashley Hoare is also on the panel today. She's a senior lecturer and researcher at the University of Canberra's News and Media Research Centre. She specialises in the importance of equitable communication to advance social inclusion, with a particular focus on representation of marginalised people in news, digital and organisational communication. Ashley has more than 15 years experience in research, education, community engagement and policy development focused on advancing social equity for migrants, refugees and people with a disability. Ashley, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And finally, you've met him already. Many of you probably know him from before today's session, Craig Wallace, who is the CEO and Head of Policy and Advocacy for Inclusion. Prior to joining, Craig was Head of Policy at the ACT Council for Social Service. He is the past president of a national peak body for disability rights in Australia, and is also an occasional opinion editorial commentator in ACT and national media. We at ABC Canberra love Craig Wallace. He is very often on the wireless. He's passionate about disability rights and campaigns on housing, NDIS, health access, abuse and neglect issues, and social justice for vulnerable and disadvantaged people. Craig, thank you again for being here.
Thanks. What an introduction. Really glad to be part of a great panel here today.
Let's begin our panel with the question of what does hate look like? So what you're seeing on the ground today here in 2025. Nicole, would you like to start us off?
Thanks, Saskia. Just for those who are listening in, I'm a middle-aged woman, white with half-rimmed glasses and greying light brown hair. And in my background, I have an image of the amazing land on which I live, and I would like to acknowledge the Ngayunoni people of Lunawani. I'm not coming from ACT, I'm coming from Hobart. I think a lot of ableist hate crime and ableist hate speech goes unnoticed because it is everywhere. It is ubiquitous. It is in everyday conversations. It is the first words that come out in conflict. It is in the mouths of presidents that have power to shape our lives. But I think it's also about the everyday moments where we are felt like we are not human, that we are infants, that we are a burden. And I think that ableism is in fact almost the template of most forms of hate, in that ableist slurs are used not just against disabled people. We know this. It is used in everyday communication, but it's also present in other forms of hate crime, such as homophobia, transphobia, racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. All of these forms of hate, when it is enacted, actually draw on ableist slurs. So I almost see ableism and ableist hate speech as the base on which all other forms of hate are developed. I think that we also need to recognize that it's in the everyday banter that, and often by people who are totally unaware of the origin and the harms of those words. It's directed, as I said, in heated debate. It's a common theme throughout all forms of hate crime. And it's almost like this thread that is weaved through all of those forms of hate. But I think what is different, and I defer to my other colleagues here, what is different now, I think, is the dispersive power and danger of the internet. Most ableist slurs occur in the interpersonal one-on-one, but once we have social media, that has this dispersive power that impacts not just on the harms created for disabled people, but normalizing those kinds of slurs for everybody. So I think that we need to recognize that that is a basis of all hate. It creates us as less than human. I have to say, though, we don't know whether there's been a surge or that there is an increase in hate speech because we don't have a baseline figure. We have no agency who is capturing these incidents. We have no way to record these incidents. And those people those institutions that are responsible for collecting this kind of information are often highly underfunded in terms and untrained in terms of recognizing what ableist violence looks like.
Thank you, Nicole. Jared, I'm interested in bringing you into the conversation now. That question of whether or not we are seeing a surge is a difficult one for the reasons that Nicole just outlined. What's your view on that?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm just coming in from Gadigal land today, and just to describe myself, so an older man of Irish Anglo background in a suit jacket and with Harry Potter glasses and greying. Yeah, it's a really good question, and thank you very much, Nicole, for I think that profound and sobering account. And I think one thing is about the pervasiveness of it, and I'm struck more. My expertise is more in sort of digital technologies, disability accessibility, and I'm part of a wonderful group of researchers working on digital citizenship and disability. And what it strikes me, and this week I'm teaching a course with Singaporean colleagues on digital media governance, and it just strikes me that in terms of the incidents, we are not sure in, say, the digital realm where a lot of this is happening. I don't think the statistics or the cases are gathered about this, but there are lots of reasons for concern, I think, particularly given this kind of pervasiveness and perhaps the continuum, or what you're saying, Nicole, the base of sort of ableism and disableism around the representations. If you're dealing with misinformation and dealing with hate speech, it really emerged. I think there was this sense that the internet was going to be a wonderful space. It's going to be a wonderful space for people with disability. It has been, right? In many ways, it's opened up possibilities. And we can see in the social media ban, those things being closed down. But on the other hand, what you really saw for those of us studying social media, my colleague Katie Ellis from Curtin University and many others, social media rises, and the rise of visible hate speech, of disableism and so on. So I do think one of the things we need to do is to much more in the digital realm, put this front and centre. I was lucky to be advising the eSafety Commission on a great bit of research they did last year on young gamers online, and they had a significant cohort of young people with disability who are gamers, right? And the thing is, they were online more than their non-disabled counterparts. They got more out of it. Yet the report showed that they were much more likely to be the target of or engage in bullying type behaviours. They were much more likely to encounter content and ideas associated with harm, experience online harm, grooming type behaviours, and receive or be asked to send nude pictures, videos, sexual information by gaming. There's a range of things there, but I think hate speech is part of that, and that kind of online violence. There's an example, I think, of one important regulator, the eSafety Commission, who's starting to gather some data. But my sense is we really do need to do much more about that, and to really make it a condition when the platforms and others, in terms of the actors around online hate, are in the frame, to give the legibility to understand and gather information about disability hate speech and other online violence around people with disability.
It's concerning to hear that spaces that people find belonging and social connection and joy from are equally really dangerous and harmful spaces. Ashley, what have you learned through your work about this, about the rise, well, maybe it's a rise of hate speech?
Yeah, I'd love to contribute to that. I'll just quickly describe myself as well. I'm a young-ish woman. 40 is objectively young, right? Still good. Okay.
Definitely.
Okay. Yay. And my pronouns are she, her. I have long brown hair, very white skin, light green eyes. I'm wearing a pink long sleeve top today. And I'll do my best to speak slow. My natural speaking voice is a little bit turbocharged. So if you need to politely interrupt me and remind me, do not feel rude. I would love that. I do forget and I get excited. But yeah, so again, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not a researcher who looks at trends and things in hate speech, so I can't really comment on whether there's been a surge or a rise or anything like that. And as Nicole pointed out, there's not a lot of readily available data on this, and disability is often left out of data that we often do see in these kinds of respects. However, as somebody who has some invisible disabilities and exists in these kind of online activism community spaces and networked counter-public spaces, as well as researchers' issues around inclusive terminology and language around disability as well, and access and inclusion around disability, there are a lot of things that I do see and become kind of hyper aware of. And I've definitely noticed that I'm still on disability Twitter. I'm clinging on to that for dear life because I have found really great community there. So I might be one of the only ones left soon, but I am in those spaces and I do see, and I think my Twitter's been curated in a way where that's almost all of the content that I see is around these kinds of issues. And it's, as Gerard said, this double-edged sword where it's a really important place for community and coming together and showing solidarity, while at the same time you do constantly see things like disability faker discourse and these binaries of you have to be an inspiration who's just overproducing and doing all of these seemingly outer what's the word for being superhuman kind of things in order to be seen as worthy of any kind of I guess, respectful labels or respectful treatment. But at the same time, if you're not seen as being disabled enough, which I say in air quotes, then you're seen as being a faker or an attention seeker or not deserving of support. And these can be quite covert forms of ableism that a lot of people outside of the spaces where we are today may not regard as ableism. And when you highlight that, you sometimes find yourself in an exchange where you're having to manage the hurt feelings of the other person in a way that reminds me of Ruby Hamad's work on white tears and brown scars in the context of racism, where calling in or calling out racism sometimes is seen as more of an offense than the racism itself. That is definitely an issue I'm seeing with ableism as well. Often in very left-leaning and progressive spaces, even you will see rhetoric and even erasure of disability. I've been corrected and told not to say the word disabled, and then I have to come back and go, actually, no, it's fine, and have these kind of discussions, even with very well-meaning and very well, and people who are very much on the side of wanting to be inclusive, but have either internalized or picked up on these ideas around disability that can do a lot of harm. And in my opinion, I think that tends to fuel those more overt forms of hate speech, or more acceptance of more overt forms of hate speech. Because when we see disability on this binary of you are either superhuman or you need to be pitied and you're this tragedy to be fixed, it's really hard to get a sense of the multifaceted real people that live with disability. And it can be hard to kind of navigate that. I wanted to be able to talk about the realities of how hard it can be to have disabilities without being told, no, that's not positive enough, and focus on what you can do and all of that. But I want to be able to say all of that, but I also want to be able to highlight the real injustices that we do still experience, without then being told that that's all about that's taking something away from someone. And I think this kind of war on woke that we've seen with people like Trump being able to be in power, and even I'd say the attempt of Peter Dutton to kind of try to reinvigorate or to try to recreate some of that in Australia that wasn't successful in the sense that he wasn't elected, but I think from some of the analysis that I've done with some colleagues, it did still get through in some respects. There is this idea of when I feel like every time there's a new announcement of something that's being a policy or something that's being created to make life a little bit easier for people with disabilities, suddenly you get that rhetoric of it's like something's being taken away from other people, or this isn't fair, or what if people pretend, what if people fake it, how are they going to prove their disability, and then that normalizes systems that make it even harder to get the supports that people need. So more of my work has looked at those subtle and quite covert and often really well accepted forms of ableism that just haven't caught up to where we're at with some other areas. And that's not to suggest that we've, fixed racism or anything like that. We're still miles behind in that regard as well. But I do think there are conversations around things like racism, gender, to a certain extent, transphobia as well, and a few other areas where you will see more calling in and calling out of those issues, and it seems to be a little bit more difficult to do that, more difficult to do that successfully with ableism, which I'm happy to we see if we can unpack that further, because I'd be keen to hear what the others think about that as well.
Yeah, sure. You just raised so many really interesting points. Thank you, Ashley. And it does feel like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place there with what you said about being shut down from kind of both sides of the political spectrum when you try and talk about disability. Craig, I'd love to bring you in now and hear your reflections on what we've heard so far.
Yeah. Thanks, Saskia. And just by way of a visual description, I'm an older man. Apparently, in Japan, you can say you're sort of younger until about sort of 60. So I'm wishing that I could do that here. But I'm an older man who's uses a wheelchair, and I'm balding, and I'm wearing a First Nations tie. Look, I think I just reflecting on something that other speakers have said, Nicole and Jared and Ashley as well. Like, I think that there is a data gap here. We don't do broad brush community attitudes survey work in Australia, and I've always thought that that was a gap, and that we should be doing a lot more of it, given the sort of investments that we seem to make in all these disability awards, as well as things like IDA. To be honest, like, we need a lot more management information about what it is that people are actually feeling and thinking, and what it might take to turn the dial, particularly on something like disability employment. But, lately I've begun to think, well, actually, we're in possibly the most, detailed, immersive, deep dive into community attitudes that's ever been conducted in history. Like, everybody's got a talking stick now that they can use. So, like, when I grew up in the sort of 70s and 80s, you would not have known, probably, aside from the sort of polling that's done by the big firms like Gallup, etc., what it was that people were thinking, and then only on particular issues. So the test now, I think, is what happens when you've got a social media post that is topical to a particular issue. Like, it's a test, it's not the only test. And where I think disability is, and one of the reasons we've driven this, like, that I've kind of noticed for a while there, disability kind of sat outside the culture wars. It was a place that you didn't want to go. And even within kind of culture warrior communities, you'd kind of go, oh, no, that's a bit slack, don't go there. They were quite happy to go to trans, quite happy to go to First Nations, but disability was sort of out of bounds, I think, because for many, even if you're a person that is a right-wing populist, you've probably got somebody in your family that is experiencing disability, and, it's going to happen to all of us. But I've noticed that has kind of fallen away, and it's now fair game for everyone. I think that the moment of Trump saying that diversity, equity, and inclusion was causing the hiring of people with disabilities who were dangerous to other workers was a moment where I suddenly went, okay, this is really broken through. As the use of the R word everywhere in discourse now by Musk, and Trump is something else. And to me, it is a bit like a fire that's being slowly stoked along by changing what is acceptable. Suddenly it's acceptable now to talk in this way about a new group of people. And I think that disability is in for a rude Like we're in for a rude shock and we need to be ready on this. I think it's going to be our moment in the sun. This has been stoked for a couple of years through COVID, where there was a quite, I think, problematic discussion about the value of people with underlying health conditions, the NDIS now being posed as a sort of giant waste of money has opened up, provided a license for people to comment about it in a different way. So I kind of think we're entering a quite difficult space, unfortunately, and we need to respond.
So you think it's going to get worse from here, perhaps, Craig? It sounds like you are preparing for that possibility.
Yeah, I believe that we're on what I'd call an amplification chain of negativity about disability. I think sort of in the cycle, we've had a good decade of disability being suddenly front of mind in public conversation, particularly with the campaign for the NDIS. All kinds of people and parties came together to be positive about it, but I think we do risk this being a target now of the populist right and the culture war fronts, and where they go, it seems like the rest of the community winds up going, unless you do work to stop it. I think it is possible to do some things about it, but we are in a particular moment right now where we as a community need to be talking about the prevalence of this and what it is we might need to stop it, and what the role of DPOs and people with disabilities is in doing that. Like, I think the idea that you can just sit back and say, as progressives often do, oh, we don't engage with this sniff. We just we don't engage with this social media trolling and all the rest of it. We leave that to others to do. Well, that hasn't worked anywhere else. So I think we need to have a serious conversation about how we engage with it. And that's partly why we're doing today.
Mm. Yeah, and a few of you have already touched on how this type of rhetoric has entered politics, notably in the US, but elsewhere in the world as well. Jared, from your work in digital spaces, are there any particular platforms where ableist hate speech is particularly rife?
Look, I think I'm probably not as on top of that as I might, and others would be interesting to hear what others thought. But I do think there, a number of, because there's such a range of platforms, there's really a lot of scope around this. And I think one of the problems has been, I think now where ableist speech and hate speech is starting to really proliferate, and I do think it's in an uptick, is some of the platforms that really have problems with moderation, right? Have problems with actually creating, a safe space. And you look at the case of, let's say, one platform X who pulls out its content moderation team and then is not cooperating or engaging with civil society in the way it did. And so then I think there are a number of other platforms. I mean, some of the gaming platforms that are currently under consideration in the social media plan, the likes of Roblox, for instance, are one of them, but other platforms where you've got a skew across the far right, for instance, people talking some of the sources of hate speech and that being encapsulated in ableist terms, I think is a problem as well. So I think, one of the really important things I think is that there is a real opportunity for the work on hate speech and crime. I was just reading Sam Connor's great submission from 2024 on that, and very much appreciating the leadership of Advocacy for Inclusion and with Disabilities, ACT and others in doing this. Seems to me there's a disconnect between what's going on around the governance of the digital space and these platforms and trying to work through digital platforms, and then what's going on in other sectors as well. So I think there's actually a range of particular platforms in play, and I think it really varies. Like, it's really interesting for me to see from the work on children and young people, the kind of platforms they're using there and the kinds of hate speech that's going on. So I think there's more highly visible types, but I think the issues really affect people across a range of platforms.
I should say to all of our panelists, if there's ever a point where you'd like to jump in and offer your reflections based on what someone else has said, feel free to do that. Just unmute yourself and have your say, because you all have so much knowledge and we do want to hear as much from you as we can. Nicole, I wonder if you could help us break down the terminology that we're using here, terms like hate speech, misinformation, disinformation. What are the differences between these terms? I think it's important that we understand what each of them mean.
And thank you, Saskia, for giving us permission to interject when needed. And I was going to, with what Gerard was saying, I think TikTok is particularly dangerous in terms of its capacity to turn ridicule into entertainment and to impersonate our lives as forms of entertainment. So there are issues across all platforms. I'm not saying anyone is worse than the other, but I think that the type of aim of TikTok actually facilitates ridicule as entertainment. And I think that is a really dangerous space, because then that flows into in-person encounters. I also want to say I'm that person that reports everybody on Facebook in the comments section, and never, ever have I had a response from Facebook or Meta that said this breaches community standards, because it doesn't. It is so, and this is, I keep going back to this, it's so normalized. It is so part of everyday banter that people do not even recognize what they're saying. And I particularly, with the current US president and a few of his acolytes, the turning everybody, all enemies, into people with intellectual disabilities, that they're not smart, they're stupid, that they can't think through things, particularly really smart journalists, this sense of making everybody who is an enemy disabled in some way, whether that's mental illness or intellectual disability, I think is the two core themes that we see coming out of particularly the US. In terms of the differences between dis, and disinformation and hate speech, there is a really hazy line between all of these, particularly in terms of ableist slurs and ableist violence. Dis and misinformation often skews towards hate speech, but it is not necessarily hate speech. It can be drawing on eugenicist type ideas, using eugenics, which, in some people's minds is a science, and it is also almost given, validity because it used to be a science. I think hate speech, though, is much more directed at an individual, a specific individual, and whether that's in person or online. It is about naming up, humiliating, isolating that person. I think the important thing about the difference between dis and misinformation and hate speech is that hate speech is almost the only or primary indicator of whether a crime is a hate crime or not. And of course, there's different laws in different jurisdictions in Australia, but what's said before, during, or after an incident, a criminal incident, is often the only indication of whether something is a hate crime or not. And I think that we do not take enough attention on what is actually said against disabled people. There are key racist terms, homophobic terms that we know we do not say, but that is not the case in terms of ableist slurs that are just part and parcel of everyday life and everyday conflict, particularly. But I think mis and disinformation, particularly sort of that, the burden discourses, the, lack of productivity discourses, the pathology, that we are dirt and disease, and that we shouldn't be in public spaces, and that we may be a contagion or polluting influence. I think that sets the scene for a culture of denial and denigration that makes permissible the individualized hate speech. And far from the margins, I think ableist hate speech is driven by powerful people who call us a burden, as much as it is about that awful person on the bus or train who said harmful words to us. So that I think there is a two-way process between powerful people and the margins around making this kind of speech permissible, that it is okay to use these terms. And even in my friendship networks, as Ashley was saying, even in progressive organizations and movements, when they talk about their opponents, the first thing they do is go to ableist slurs, that they use that as a way in which to denigrate that particular view. So I think the dis and misinformation and hate speech, I don't think that we can easily just demarcate those from each other. I think they feed into each other and they amplify each other.
Ashley, would you like to contribute to that? You're nodding away there.
I was nodding furiously throughout that. There's a thing that I often say. I teach units in inclusive communication, and I also teach a lot of our mis and disinformation and credible communication content at University of Canberra. And there's actually so much overlap between what we do in so many different ways that I often end up saying this sentence to my students, that when I'm talking to them about the differences between the terms, that disinformation does not always constitute hate speech. However, hate speech is always disinformation. And then when you break that down, you could see deliberately false stories that are completely innocuous, where it's something silly that an animal did. This cat saved another cat from a tree or something like that. That's not going to harm anybody, but it's disinformation technically. However, hate speech is never going to be true. It's never going to be acceptable. It's never going to not do harm, and it's never going to not be intentionally harmful. So I think that's a nice, if people want to steal that saying, I think that's a nice saying. Disinformation is not always hate speech, but hate speech is always disinformation. And I do agree that the lines can get blurry. You see the words being used interchangeably a lot of the time. And I think it's worth pointing out that there is, and I've done a lot of research on misinformation and how that impacts people with disabilities, and also how that impacts migrants with disabilities in particular, because there are compounded impacts that can have. And it happens in this way that misinformation about these communities often happen particularly during these times of crisis and uncertainty, when people are searching for scapegoats that are different to how they are, or that they can project some sort of difference onto, to say, somebody else has caused this. That person is not me. This isn't my problem. I can continue life as normal. I didn't cause this. Here's someone that we can blame. That's a constant thing that we see that feeds back into mis and disinformation as well. But then at the same time, it's not just mis and disinformation about these groups that is so harmful, but it's also, there's a pervasive targeting of people who have a hard time accessing information on an equitable basis to other people, that I see as a really pervasive systemic form of ableism that we've normalized so much, that you have communities that are begging for accessible, clear communication, particularly during health crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic, being constantly denied those things and being told things like that would be special treatment, or that it's too difficult, or maybe next time. And that's communicating not just to those people, but to everybody else, that you are less important than the rest of us, that you are devalued under people who don't have disabilities, or people who aren't experiencing that, the hardships and the because this, I'm generalizing this not just to disability, but a lot of different groups as well, but people who have been traditionally marginalized, that you are less important than who we see as the majority. And I made the sort of clumsily made this argument earlier, that is very, it's though normalizing and not challenging those ideas actually fuels those more overt forms of ableism that we see as well. Another thing that I've noticed is on social media is people are really great at censoring terms that are known to be slurs for communities that outside of disability. So you'll see people are really great at saying the N word instead of saying the word, but then you'll still see people actually saying the R word, actually spelling it out. I even saw a post recently where someone was talking about the importance of not using those other words even when you're calling it out, but then they themselves used the R word while talking about why that's a harmful slur, and then a few people pointed out, so why are you doing it differently? And that encouraged that person to rethink it. And thankfully, that was a person who was very receptive to that feedback, and it started a really nice dialogue. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, what I've noticed on social media and quite commonly on I'm not really on, I have to say, I'm not on TikTok. I'm not cool enough for TikTok. But Facebook, especially, because I'm sort of still on there a little bit, Instagram, Twitter, you will still see even this sort of polite challenging of those kinds of ideas met with a lot of defensiveness and a lot of people. And then you end up with this lengthy thing of whether or not it's ableism. And I'm not ableist. I have friends who have disabilities, or I volunteer, or I study this or something. And and it does feel like what I was saying before about us being back where conversations about racism were maybe 10 or 20 years ago. And again, not to say that, that those problems are gone and that they're still a huge problem. I still every semester I mark at least one assignment where someone says something quite harmful, or suggests that we need to go to colorblind ideology where we don't see race and all that kind of stuff. So there's still problems, but I am finding that when you with disability, it feels like we are lagging quite far behind. And as has been brought out, this even really progressive spaces on social media can perpetuate and normalize a lot of that. Like, I've sometimes been in groups and communities on Facebook, for example, where I'm the only person who will point out that, oh, you're using grammar shaming, and you're shaming a person's intellect. But in the context of a post where you're talking about how people shouldn't be racist or sexist or transphobic, but in the same post you're calling people the M word, and the so M as in M for Mary, and words like and just other words that are euphemisms for intellectual disability and that have been known to be harmful slurs for intellectual disability. And I've been removed from a group for being too negative, for calling that out and saying, oh, actually that's a form of hate speech as well. Why are we okay with that and not okay with these other forms? And so I often find that you often feel like you're like it's a real uphill battle to try to manage that. And you feel like you're preaching to the converted in a lot of these kinds of lovely panels that we get to do. And then as soon as you're removed from that, you're one of hundreds of people. You're the only person saying, oh, hey, that's not okay. You're outnumbered. And that whole thing of being outnumbered reinforces to everybody else that what they're doing is okay, and it goes unchallenged. And that's a concern that I've seen as a pattern on social media that I don't think is going away, and it does concern me a lot. Yeah.
Craig, you've got your hand up. Let's hear from you now.
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about what we think are the kind of differences in the way and the levels of harm that might be experienced across the platforms. I'd also conjecture that there's probably also differences in the way that this is experienced by people with different kinds of disability and different diagnostic disability. So I work in a cross-disability way in a cross-disability organisation, but there are issues where you actually need to come at it with a diagnostic analysis. I think that for people with a cognitive and intellectual disability, I'm really worried about some of that sort of TikTok humour style stuff that we're starting to see. I mean, I'm sort of waiting for somebody, well, not waiting, I'm dreading it actually, for somebody to come up with a sort of challenge on TikTok that involves making a joke or one-upping a person with an intellectual or cognitive disability in a public space. Like, you can kind of imagine the sort of thing and what that might look like, as well as the sort of entry of AI into some of this and what you'll be able to do with filters and manipulating people into, different aspects and personas and personal characteristics and overlaying it onto them. Like, we could suddenly be dealing with that as a form of sort of disability hate crime. But I think that kind of humour stuff is the one that kind of worries me about tipping into real life and violence. I think the disinformation is that what worries me about that is it's kind of like a slow corrosion of trust and integrity and the sort of license for investment and community action. Like if every time there's a post on the NDIS or on the disability support pension or even on things like making spaces and places accessible, you're getting a narrative that, why should I be doing this? That disadvantages business. It's an unfair burden on the rest of us. Just kind of, this is how you were born, just go and put up with it. And there is a fair bit of that commentary online. And there's a lot of commentary about the NDIS and about the cost of it and about it being a burden. There are tropes that emerge around people kind of, dragging out stuff about sex work, about support types that are very rarely accessed, that are kind of then used and kind of attached as emblematic motifs to the entire investment. And over time, I worry that leads to it becomes a public association. If you're in marketing, which is where I came from, sadly, I've kind of moved on and rehabilitated. But anyway, they kind of say if you say something to people 3 times, it is sort of embedded. And that's a principle of adult learning as well. And I think that is sometimes what these memes do. This stuff often looks really simple. It looks absurd and it looks frankly ridiculous. And so the kind of reaction of people that are in my shoes and the shoes of people on this panel is sometimes to dismiss it as unserious, but unserious is not unconsequential. And so some of this stuff, like the memes that are coming out around COVID, where I'd sort of say, be a person in a scooter that is larger, wearing a mask. Well, actually, all they need to do is maha themselves, start putting protein powder on their shakes and change their diet, and they'll all be right. These things are converging into different forms of harm, but also shaped against different groups of people. And I think there's value in the disability community going, hey, okay, we're going to gather the horses around the wagons, around some people in our community and start fighting back on some of this stuff, start fact-checking it, start really doing one of the models I think that's actually worked. If you're looking at any space where, like in the community, where there's been a successful campaign against disinformation, I think it's around elections in Australia. So we have not had, touch wood, the kinds of false election, stolen. People have tried it, but it's not taken off in Australia, partly because there's compulsory voting, but also because you've got the AEC. The Electoral Commission is everywhere. And every time somebody goes on, does one of these posts on X or whatever about elections being stolen or tries to impugn the quite wonderful and unique electoral process that we've got in this country, the AEC are on it and they're fact-checking it and they're correcting it. Other communities that do this really well, I think the LGBTIQA plus community have done this around HIV disinformation because they've resourced community organisations to take on that task. I look at this and I kind of go, look, actually, people with disability have never been resourced to take on any of this. Like, if you kind of think about the stuff that the First Nations have been through following The Voice, it's been terrible, but at least it's been recognised that stuff is happening to that community and it deserves to be resourced to fight back against it. The same with the same-sex marriage referendum and the consequences for that community. Government stepped up and say, hey, we've got a role to stand up some supports to help the community fight it. I'm not seeing that for people with disability. It's like the world has suddenly changed around us. There's COVID, there's the NDIS attacks, there's what's coming from America, and we're just being left to fight it on our own. And I think that needs a broader conversation.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for turning our conversation a little bit toward the question of solutions, because while we recognize and name the problem, and that is so important to do, I think we need to then look forward at what needs to be done to help tackle this. Jared, on the question of solutions, it's a big question. It's really large, but what do you think we should be considering?
Yeah, I found it just super, super interesting. I think what Craig was just saying in terms of resources is incredibly important. Like, resources for fighting back, but I think actually resources for cultural production. That I think more broadly, coming out of the Disability Royal Commission, I think there was a thing about attitudes, but there was a missing bit about how those attitudes will be changed. And I just think, for instance, reminded a piece of work I did with, in fact, what the great Sue Salthouse and Christopher Newell nearly 20 years ago about this, representation of people in film and film TV industries, really woeful, right? So I think to actually ensure that people are in these industries, that there's resources for producing a whole range of innovative, experimental and other content, including entertainment content, because I think that point about these entertainment genres being used and twisted around is important, as well as fighting back resources that deliberately goes to contesting this. I think a second piece is actually there really is an obvious opportunity perhaps for us to get together and do some sort of studies we've seen in the chat as well about digital platforms, things like moderation, which is problematic, but tracing what's going on and really putting that on the agenda. I don't think internationally is a bit of work. Then I think the other bit is about what you might call digital inclusion. We know that people with disabilities as a group are still often highly excluded digitally and lacking resources, but nothing's being done. I think there's very slow progress on this basic stuff. And I think that goes to visibility, the sense in which Ashley was saying feeling alone. This is a kind of these are public spheres, right, as well as being in people's private lives. So tackling that is really critical with the other elements of inclusion. So that'd be some of the things.
I think a really good place to start. Nicole, let's hear from you on this and what you've heard since you last had the mic.
I'm much more on the in-person, the situated violence than online violence. So I want to speak more about that situated violence. They both feed each other. I don't think that they are distinct. And I think, that there's some of the comments that have been coming through from attendees about recognizing the different ways in which social media has amplified some really, really problematic themes around disability. And particularly we see this when the NDIS is discussed, when disability is discussed, the super crip discourses that we see, and then the comments section of, well, if that person can do it, then why are we giving all this money to other disabled people? But one of the worrying trends that I'm seeing at the moment is what Hannah Mason Bish calls the competition of suffering. And this is not only in terms of marginalised communities vying for attention from government and to change policies and practices, but it's also happening within our disability communities, that there is a hierarchy of disability. And I'm not going to name names or anything, but was recently told that, well, autism really isn't a disability, like a serious disability. But then also hearing that, well, you're not autistic enough for it to be a disability. So we've got a lot of boundary maintenance happening within disability communities that I think we need to be really careful of not carving off a whole lot of people who will then face those harms without support, without recognition and support. I think from my perspective, from a hate crime perspective and the role of hate speech in hate crime, I got access to 100,000 hate crime cases from the London Metropolitan Police Service and did a discourse analysis on the hate speech used in hate crime. And the themes are the same no matter who the target is. The words may change a little, the name calling may change, but we are still calling on themes of dirt, disease, criminalisation, pathologization, expatriation. Get out of my space. I don't want you in this public space with me, that it feels not quite right. And Carly Finlay talks a lot about that, particularly with people with facial differences. I think from a very institutionalist, so I'm a criminologist at heart, and so I'm thinking about the criminal and civil justice systems, that civil complaint systems are reliant upon a complainant to take action. And as we know, a lot of people with disability do not have those resources to take an individual complaint to a anti-discrimination commission or anything like that, and particularly in terms of vilification, which is even harder to prove than discrimination. And I also have an issue that vilification legislation is focused on the harm of inciting somebody else, not the original harm of that speech in the first instance. That's not regulated at all. What's regulated is the capacity for somebody else to be incited. So it's actually not addressing that primary harm. But in terms of hate crime, what we see is the critical issue is that most of our communities do not recognize that what they experience is hate speech or hate crime, that it is so normalized that they don't recognize it. So therefore, they're not going to make a complaint about it, whether that's to the police or to civil justice organizations, irrespective of all the issues about what it takes to be a complaint maker and then the harms that come from being a complaint maker, because then you're a troublemaker. But we also see, particularly when it comes to police and hate crime, that the average police officer doesn't even know what a hate crime is in the first instance, let alone what a ableist hate crime looks like. And so we've got what I call the tipping points of hate crime. The victim survivor may not recognize what they're experiencing is hate. They may not recognize or know that they are allowed to make a complaint about it. When they make a complaint, the person who's taking that report may not recognize that what they're seeing is a crime or hate, that they may not record what is said, which is the most critical evidence of a hate crime. They may not brief the prosecutor that there is a hate element to the crime. And then the prosecutor may actually drop the whole hate aspect of that crime just to get a conviction. So we see in hate crime that we're only talking about 1% of offenders are actually brought to justice, because there are so many tipping points where people drop off and lose justice as part of that process. We have other communities who experience targeted hate that have third-party reporting systems. And I think third-party reporting systems are the most effective strategy for communities that do not trust or do not have faith in the criminal justice system or the civil justice system, because it enables us to advocate on behalf of individual victim survivors, but more importantly, advocate across the whole civil and criminal justice system for changes in, simple things like training and recognizing ableist violence. So I think there is a lot of work to be done in upskilling practitioners in civil and criminal justice frameworks, but also to upskill our communities. So I do a lot of work in Tasmania around ally upstander training and also victim advocacy training from community, so that community can do that work. We all know members of the disability community who are doing that off the side of their desks. We need to be paid for that work, and we need to be at the table ensuring that whatever legal frameworks are established to manage this hate actually includes our voices, because at the moment it is, I think it was actually said, disability gets added as an extra, that it was like, race, sexuality, gender, etc. Oh, and disability. And I don't think there's enough training of our criminal justice practitioners to recognise the experiences of disabled people. So that's where I see a lot of space needs to be done.
Thank you, Nicole. We have about 5 minutes left. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone on this panel. And thank you to each of you for the incredible expertise and research and wisdom that you have brought to today's session. I think it might be nice to offer each of you a couple of moments for some closing remarks. I'm going to go based on the order that you appear on my screen. So, Jared, would you like to kick us off?
I think, well, I personally have learned a great deal in this, but it seems like there's various things to be brought together, but incredibly important that it's done. And what emerges for me is just the lack of inaction, the lack of seriousness about this that's going on across different areas. And so it'd be great to bring some of those together. But thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Jared. Ashley, your closing remarks.
Yeah, I won't get into the difficulties of sometimes that issue of who does the work and how we deal with that, because I think that there's that's a whole panel in and of itself. But one thing that can concern us is when that can be concerning, that I think needs to be prioritized, is always expecting the work to come from disabled people, often without any kind of compensation or any resourcing in place to make sure that that work can be done safely. So even particularly in a research perspective, I'm constantly seeing these blanket recommendations of where people mean well. You're drawing on this idea of nothing about us without us, but without much thought into how to do that in a way that doesn't do further harm. And I think that I always say in these kinds of settings, if we take anything away, it's really, really important to think about adequately, properly resourcing communities on their own terms and with their own agency in the process to be part of making of making that change, because they shouldn't have their voices and perspectives excluded by any means. But at the same time, non-disabled allies need to step up and need to take on more of that work, and need to not always see it as a task that disabled people will have the spoons to do. And I also think that when we need to be careful about who we are always allocating as the spokespeople, because it is such a diverse and multifaceted experience that you cannot just have a few people speaking for everybody. You've got to think about how do we make sure that these really different experiences are captured in a way that isn't exploiting free labor of disabled people as well. So that's a kind of food for thought to leave you with.
Excellent points. Thank you, Ashley. Nicole, your final reflections?
I feel I should defer to Craig first, but one of the things I do with abled people when I'm talking about these issues is I ask them from the outset to think about the worst thing that they have ever been called in their lives, and to think about how they felt at that time. And often I then say, the fact that you can still remember that means that you were harmed by those words. And similarly, we are all harmed by the words that are used against disabled people. So I think it is actually about making it real for the individual that you're engaging with. I'm an anarchist at heart, and you can only change the person in front of you. You can't change the world. So I think it's that the hard conversations, particularly in the coming weeks over Christmas dinners and New Year's parties, and when people are getting drunk and saying things that they wouldn't normally say. I think it is about having those hard conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And lucky last, Craig Wallace, would you like to bring this home for us?
Yeah, thanks. So when AFI sort of said at the start of the year that we were going to start talking about the impact of hate speech and ableism on people with disability as a thing, we did get some pushback. So there were people that kind of said, well, look, like actually trans people and First Nations this is much more present for them, and sort of what's the evidence of impact of this, and why would you be focusing on this now? Well, actually, we've just spent an hour kind of talking about what is I think we're seeing at the surface. But I think this is a bit like what we've seen with Islamophobia, that whatever you're seeing emerge on a public social media page is nothing next to whatever is happening in 4chan, whatever is happening in some of the other private groups where like-minded people get together and have these kind of discussions. And some of us in the activism community and disability have got a bit of insight into this. There's another part to this which we haven't really discussed, which is the kind of contempt that comes sometimes from people who are close to us. So there are parent carer communities where there are discussions that are kind of about bordering on eugenics. There's discussions every time there is a case of filicide or a discussion about euthanasia. Sometimes that kind of vectors into a discussion about how the person is really a burden and a burden in the lives of their parents and carers and who's better off not here. So, like, the tipping point of this breaking out into the open with the R word now being used on X, with the kind of public conversations we have, I think suggests that there's a whole lot of stuff happening underneath in these sort of, you can imagine, like, there's some of these manosphere 4chan conversations that we all kind of know about. Like, I can't imagine the kind of stuff that is happening there. And we sort of know there was an incident in Japan where a number of people were killed in a group home. Well, presumably a long time before that, you're kind of acclimatizing people to the idea that people are less human and violence is okay, and you're steeping them in that culture before creating a permission pathway for people to act on it. So I think this is a really important conversation and a piece of work that needs to be led from somewhere. We've made a decision as an organisation that particularly in a progressive jurisdiction like the ACT, this is not a bad place to have that conversation and to start the fight back. So yeah, it's been a good, powerful conversation, but I don't think we cannot be complacent about this, because for every incident that we've called out, there is underneath, a pressure cooker boiling away of other comment and content and ideation that we are not seeing. So I'm sorry to leave this on a sort of progressive note, but we do want to kind of press the bit of alarm bell call to action here, that this is not something we can be complacent about or that we can simply leave to others to do and leave. This requires action and commitment.
Thank you, Craig. Really powerful words there. Thank you to all of our panelists, Jared, Ashley, Nicole, and Craig. It's something that we could spend so much longer speaking about, but thank you for bringing your expertise and your opinions today. The chat has been quite active, I can see, and also if any of this conversation is difficult for you to hear, further up in the chat, there is a link to some support services. We might post that again so it doesn't get too lost, because there's been a fair bit of conversation in the chat along the side there. Thank you for participating, and thank you to our panelists. What's happening next from here is shifting our focus to what happens when hate speech becomes real-world harm, the impacts on individuals, communities, and the social fabric that we all depend on. And then we'll move to the critical question, looking more at solutions. What can we do about it, which we touched on a little bit in that session there. To formally close this session, though, we're going to take a turn to from analysis to lived experience, with a personal reflection on the duty that is felt by many disabled people to speak up and the personal cost of challenging everyday ableism in the hope of shifting broader discourse. Jess Knott has agreed to share this personal piece with us. Let's take a listen.
Sorry, just one moment.
I strive to be an advocate, but never chose this path. Dice in motion as hands unformed attempt to grasp. White middle class, atop the first ladder before air filled my lungs. Vocal verbal presents additional rungs. Postgrad education bends at the knee and boosts me up again. My privilege never strays far, pinned to my breast, light reflects and blurs vision at each blink. But privilege didn't arrive empty-handed. Lived experience weakens muscles and baggage holds its weight. Duty to speak up. For those whose words won't come. For those who are forced to choose. To be heard or to be safe. Without assurance my words align. Panic, stifled by belief, hope. Anything beats silence. Obligation paves my path, the dream for later travellers' ankles safe from unsuspecting potholes. To correct strangers is to choose isolation. For the greater good, empathy is built on understanding. Perceived reprimands, threat to autonomy. I barricade my mind against micro-expressions. Pedantic, judgmental, rigid, controlling, high-strung, overbearing, inflexible, antisocial. Agenda mislabeled before first sentence began. I trail, barricades crack, wisps slide in and take root. Every so often, limbs' capacity surpassed. Unpack principles of respect, subsequent lack of impact on free speech. These days, a can of worms will undoubtedly cause grocery bags to split. Tell me I'm too PC. Play your rights as Trump. Disregard the suit. Neither will question equal footing's reach, nor whether you'd cope if forced to confront it. Curl into your ignorance, cozy. The rug won't be pulled from under your feet. Tell me again, language, culture, indifference don't have a price.
Thank you very much to Jess Knott for that really powerful piece of spoken word. We're going to take a 15-minute break now, everybody. So please do step away, stretch, take care of yourselves, do whatever you need to do in the next 15 minutes. And I will now be leaving you. I want to say a big thank you for including me in today's proceedings. Thank you to Craig for inviting me today. It's been a real pleasure to be with you, and Kat and Craig and the team will be taking care of you from here. Enjoy the rest of the day. Happy International Day of People with Disability. And I'm really pleased to see some very constructive conversations happening here. All right, folks, I'll see you later and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Saskia, for being our MC. We really couldn't have hoped for better, and you've out-Ellened Ellen. Thank you very much.
Not possible. Thank you, Craig.
Okay, we'll break for 15 minutes if you'd like to turn your mics and cameras off, and then we'll...
And I'd like to welcome you to this next session of Halting Hate and Finding Kindness. For those joining us for the first time, I'd like to acknowledge we are meeting on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people and acknowledge their elders. I am a mixed race person of colour in my late 20s. I have long brown hair and I'm wearing a red top. I have been fortunate enough to be one of the co-chairs for the I-Day Steering Committee this year, representing Women with Disabilities, ACT, of which I am the CEO. I have to say, being part of the very first I-Day Steering Committee of the very first community-controlled I-Day event and celebrations has been truly an honour, and really, I think, quite a historic making event. It is a wonder to me that we have gone to 2025 without a community-controlled event, but I am very grateful to be here, and I'm very grateful that the ACT government has funded this to occur. It has really, truly been a great time to reflect on nothing about us without us. And I truly think that this event and the events that have been occurring this today and throughout the week are a great reflection of the real meaning of I-Day for people with disabilities. I would like to give some thanks and a quick shout out to everyone who has been part of the I-Day steering committee this year. Louise, Taryn, Ravi, Liz, and Lily, you have been incredible to work with. And of course, a special thanks to Craig, Carla, Harry, Joe, and Nick, who I know have been working tirelessly behind the scenes to bring you the event today and the Canberra Weekly special and all the other fantastic celebrations we have. Earlier this afternoon, we spent time understanding the problem. We heard from Professor Goggin, Dr. Hall, and Professor Asquith about how disability hate speech and disinformation operates. The platforms it uses, the narratives that circulate, the speed at which misinformation spreads, and the conditions that allow it to move from the fringes into mainstream discourse. That session was about establishing the reality of what we are dealing with and the mechanisms behind it. Now, we will shift our focus. Understanding how hate speech spreads is important, but it's not enough. We need to understand what it actually does. What are the consequences when ableist language and false information about disability go unchallenged? How does this translate into tangible harm in people's lives? That's what this next session is about. We're moving from understanding the nature of the problem to examining its real-world impact across three critical areas: discrimination and exclusion, economic participation and employment, and mental health and safety. To take us through this next stream, I'd like to welcome Sarah Guise. Sarah is the host of Disability Reform on Canberra Radio 1RPH and is the producer of the new Independent Assessment podcast. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Kat. Hello, everyone. It's really great to be joining this important discussion and facilitating this session. Let me give you a brief introduction of myself. I am a mid-century woman, because I don't like the term middle-aged, with shoulder-length silver hair. Today I am wearing my reading glasses and a red jacket. So in a moment, you're going to be assigned to one of the three breakout streams. I understand many of you have pre-selected the one that you want to join that's of most interest to you, but the AFI team can also manually put you into a stream if you haven't done that. Each of the streams is going to run for 35 minutes, and it's going to be led by someone with interest and work in that area. So let me take a few moments now to introduce the streams and the stream facilitators. Dr. Robin Banks will lead the discrimination stream. Dr. Banks will be well known to AFI members for her work on discrimination policy and Disability Discrimination Act reform. This group is going to explore how hate speech and misinformation translate into actual exclusion, being denied access to spaces, services, and opportunities. You're going to look at how language crosses the line into unlawful conduct and how harmful narratives shape policies and practices that create barristers. Next up, Craig Wallace is going to be heading the Economy and Jobs stream. Craig is AFI's Head of Policy, and in a past life, he managed Commonwealth disability employment programs, and also led work on the National Mental Health and Disability Employment Strategy. That group is going to examine the economic consequences of ableism and what that costs individuals, businesses, and the broader economy. You'll discuss how burden language and false narratives about productivity create real losses in workforce participation. And last but definitely not least, Seymour is heading up the mental health and violence stream. Hi, C. C's the health literacy officer at the Healthcare Consumers Association and has a background in systemic advocacy and community engagement. They've worked at the ANU and CIT student associations, Women with Disabilities ACT and Carers ACT, and are the co-host with Craig of the Independent Assessment podcast. This group is going to look at both the cumulative toll of constant exposure to ableist hate speech, as well as the acute harms when that speech escalates into harassment, threats, or violence. You'll discuss what that does to people's well-being, their sense of safety, and their ability to participate in community life. Now, each stream leader will open with some perspectives and discussion starters and then guide you through a series of questions. We want to hear real examples, real consequences, and your analysis of what happens when harm goes unaddressed. At the end of the 35 minutes, each group will take a few minutes to identify the 2 or 3 key themes that emerge from your discussion, and those will be the insights that you bring back to share with everybody. We're going to take a short break at 3:15 and reconvene here at 20 past 3, and each stream leader will then report back on what they heard, and we'll have a broader discussion about what it all means. So the purpose of this session is to be clear-eyed about what's actually at stake. People with disability are paying the price for inaction daily in ways that are measurable and preventable, but we can't design effective responses if we don't understand the full scope of the harm. So we are now going to move into the next sessions. Technology is slowly doing its thing.
Hi everyone, Carla here. If you're having any issues or you can't see where to join a room, please get in contact with me and I can help you.
If you're looking for the option and it hasn't automatically sent you off, there's 3 little dots where it says more, and I think there's an option in there. Is that right, Carla?
Yes, I believe so.
If there isn't out and out a button on the bottom of your taskbar next to record that says join breakout room, and then it will give you the 3 options to choose from.
I haven't got that join breakout room message.
Is that you, Jill?
Yes, it is.
Which one would you like to go to?
I'm just trying to remember. I think it was access I chose. There's an access one, isn't there?
There's economy and jobs, mental health and violence, and discrimination.
Oh, okay. Maybe because I didn't choose. Oh, sorry, economy. I thought there was an access one. So what was it? Economy? Sorry, I'm just a bit slow today. Economy and jobs.
Yeah, with Craig.
Yeah.
Mental health and violence with C, and discrimination with Robin Banks.
Oh, discrimination.
Perfect. All right, I'll move now.
I knew I'd chosen one.
Productive, even if it was difficult. We're going to hear now from each of our three stream leaders about what emerged in their discussions. And as you listen, I'd encourage you to notice the connections between the streams, the ways that discrimination, economic exclusion, and the threats to safety and well-being reinforce each other. We'll hear from each stream leader in turn, and then I will open it up for reflections and questions from the room. So, Robin, I believe you're up first.
Thank you, Sarah. I think I am. Scary, hey?
Less time to prepare, but sorry, you're on the spot.
That was great. No, that's fine. We had a really rich and important conversation, which started with the observation that there are things done to people with disability, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes targeted, and sometimes at large. So sometimes ableist language is used as a generic insult, as we've heard earlier, but still it has an impact on people with disability. And that, one of the comments that came up was that whether or not it's intentional, whether or not it's targeted, it still does harm. It causes enormous harm, irrespective of whether it's intentional or not. And I'll just put in a little aside here, which is under discrimination law, intention is irrelevant. A person doesn't have to intend to discriminate against you for it to be unlawful. So important to remember that. There was a lot of discussion about, particularly for people with episodic is not quite the right dynamic disabilities, so disabilities that change over time and come and have more or less disabling effects over time. And that idea of whether or not you pass as having a disability and whether or not you're challenged, and including one person who is a younger person who uses a mobility aid, being challenged, what do you need that for? So that sort of, you're not disabled enough, which is an extraordinarily, just another complexity in the problems of ableism, is that it goes both ways. It's also a form where you're not disabled enough. You don't, you're just lazy or late or whatever else it might be. It was observed in passing that the impact of COVID was so enormous, and to me it's really interesting because there were some weird high points of COVID, which was we all got to work at home, which meant a whole lot of people with disability who's been excluded from work were now able to work and seen as able to work. But at the same time, people with disability were seen as somehow more expendable than others in the pandemic. And that is definitely, the most extreme form of harm I think you can imagine is being seen as not valued as a human being. Which takes me to the idea that discrimination is just one of the forms of human rights breaches that people with disability experience. And ableism crosses all of the human rights, ableist violence, ableist hate, whatever language you want to use, doesn't just have a discriminatory impact, it also affects all the other rights people have, including their sense that they can participate safely in the world. We talked briefly about how systems do harm as well. So Lou, thank you for reading a story in The Guardian about new systems in the NDIS that are just going to be, one more layer of abuse of people with disability, requiring ridiculous processes. And somebody observed as well in our chat that, it's so stupid that people have to prove they still have a disability that is clearly a disability that's never going to go away. So those sort of harms and the sort of questioning, I guess what it reflects, I think, is a view that people are faking it and people are trying to take advantage of systems. And it's like, really? That's just so abusive, such an abusive narrative. People talked about the harms in terms of it being exhausting to have to engage with this stuff, and so sometimes you just can't do it. And for example, if you need some sort of workplace adjustment or some sort of adjustment, even asking can become a traumatic experience depending on the response to it. And there are constant micro traumas that come up for people through ableism. I think I could just catch all of this in ableism. And so there's exhaustion, there's isolation, and there's impacts not just on the person with disability themselves when they're targeted, but also that flows on to friends and family. Right at the end, we got on to the question of, what could we do about enforcing? We've got these laws. Some of them are really great laws, but they rely on individuals to enforce them, and that's another harm. It's another incredibly traumatic process. And as a lawyer, I know what that looks like. I've seen it too many times. I was asked what could we do differently on enforcement, and my answer is we need an authority empowered to prosecute breaches of the law. We cannot continue to rely on individuals with disability or even organisations of people with disability. I mean, there are problems with those groups bringing complaints under federal law at the moment, and that's just untenable. That needs to be fixed. But in the US, the Department of Justice, so central government, has the power to prosecute. And for me, in some ways, that's actually better than giving it to the Human Rights Commission, because it says to the whole of government, this is central to who we are as a nation. So that's all I'm going to say. I hope I've caught enough of what we said to do justice to the conversation, and thank you for allowing me to participate in that way.
Thanks, Robin. Moving on now to Craig, let's hear about the discussion in the economy and job stream.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sarah, and thanks to our group for being really giving and sharing a lot with us. I'll provide a kind of top line summary, and then I'll call on Nick and Harry to see if there's anything sort of missing from their detailed notes. So we kind of started off with a bit of I guess, a top line summary of what we thought the problem was in the economy and jobs. So this starts off with the premise that the economic impacts aren't just defined by the impacts of people who are paying taxes through the private economies or through employment. It's also about assessing the impact on the license to invest in the not-for-profit economy, which provides supports for people with disabilities, as well as the support that's offered through income support systems and the barriers that people receive on the way through. So we're kind of being agnostic as to source of income here. Some of the top line facts are that we know that there are more people with disability on income support. We know that those on income support who are on DSP are constrained from accessing the rest of the economy and other opportunities. There is some evidence that points to a diminished license for public and private investment in the economic well-being of people with disability. There's a disconnect between what people say about the economic contributions of people with disability and what they're motivated to do and what they actually do. And there is lost economic value from people with disability not participating and being part of the economy, and not the sector and people not receiving the economic contributions and the support that they receive. So in terms of what that actually looks like, there are some spots of hope. For instance, the willingness to offer people with disability entry into post-school opportunities has not been something that's been observed as sort of declining in recent years, but in other areas like the willingness of the market to step up and provide accessible housing to people with disabilities, like that is not seen as improving. If anything, it seems to be getting worse. There are lots of impacts in regard to transition and access to the workforce. There was certainly a sense that the negative narrative around the whole NDIS is starting to change people's perceptions about what is available to people with disabilities outside of the scheme, and is in a way kind of traducing or affecting the reputation of people with disabilities, including outside the scheme. So it's kind of seeped into the general narrative, this idea that the NDIS is overblown, that people are getting so much funding support to it. You know, how could you possibly want more money, was one of the comments that people were sort of making, and that's causing downstream impacts. There was also a comment similar to the comments in Robin's groups that the new paradigm of post-pandemic work, which initially held out so much sort of hope, has not sustained. It's not been reflected in longer term outcomes. We've kind of speculated whether that was a result of a kind of general backlash or whiplash to those accommodations, whether it was caught up in the general, COVID split that seems to have happened across the community. There was quite a bit of discussion about what the lack of license for social and other support outside of the NDIS looked like, including a lack of responsiveness by mainstream community supports. There were a number of examples of economic harm being experienced by people on DSP. There was a quite rich example provided by one member of our session about the impacts of proving your disability and being disbelieved, including, I presume, by sort of, Centrelink workers and other people, is a form of harm, potential form of disinformation, and a form of hate. Harm is also about internalizing its experience, its impact. Falls in a number of ways, but including internalizing the judgments from other people. There was just some discussions about specific things, people being locked into renting. There was some discussions about about employment, specifically a lack of sophistication on how employment benefits are viewed, and a misunderstanding and an unwillingness to engage with concepts like the sort of opportunity benefits and costs that might be available to employers. And again, there were others who talked again about the NDIS investment and how that was perceived, and that creating a reduced support for spending outside of that. But I might invite, if Harry and Nick have got anything extra that they wanted to pick up, or other people in our group, feel free to chip in.
Thanks. I think you've covered that pretty well, Craig. There was just the social media issues that were discussed on the panel earlier as well. I think that was an important thing to pick up on, and the misinformation that is being represented. And I think the introduction of AI also is not helping that, in terms of being able to represent or recreate images and that type of thing, which does add to that misinformation and inaccurate information. Other than that, I think you've done a pretty good job of highlighting what we went through. Harry, do you have anything else to add?
No, you've captured everything I had.
Well done.
Thanks, team. Thanks, Sarah. Back to you.
No worries. So our final group, C, what do you have to report from your group?
Well, despite some technical difficulties, and I'll get my group to chime in if I've missed anything, but we did have a bit of a wide-ranging chat about the effects on mental health and how violence happens. So some of the things that came up immediately, sorry, I'm just getting some echo. was that one of the cumulative tolls of constant exposure to ableism is the re-traumatization that sort of makes the harm stack, and that trauma from those incidents can make it harder to speak and make sense. So getting support you need becomes harder and harder over time. One of the things we also talked about was that when things happen, you can just be too exhausted to speak up, and that kind of accumulates over time because things aren't done, and that you sort of let it wash over you. It still hurts, it still chips away at you. And we did also talk about the idea that you've kind of in the background got all this chipping away at you and the extra toll that takes, but it might not be visible on your mental health. A number of us talked about isolation in one way or another. So one of the common threads was a few of us had pulled ourselves off Facebook, for example, because things aren't managed well there, and that isolation contributes to not participating in community, and that can have effects because, well, other people found out about this event through social media, which if you're not on, you might not find it. And even just the discussion being so validating for some of us that we might be missing those opportunities. We talked a little bit about how this sort of escalates and how it looks in reality. So, for example, minimizing your needs is that can actually become really dangerous for people. So these attitudes can be not being believed in healthcare, so you're being denied care. And that might not be considered overt violence, but it is definitely neglect. And so there can be that impact in services. But we also talked about how these attitudes can mean that you are both, say, shunned by your family and friends, but when things are well managed and it might not be as visible, you then get hit with the it can't be that bad then. So you're kind of balancing, oh, well, you perceive me as one way, but now I'm well, I don't have any needs for support. And we also acknowledge that sometimes especially if we're talking about violence, it might be perpetuated by not supporting the people who are committing that violence. And particularly where we're talking about people with mental health issues, that continues in the justice system and those needs are never addressed. And so we do also need to think about that. And bigger picture, things like safety are not considered in, say, placing people for public housing, which may mean that people are unsupported, that there's violence going on, and you're then putting someone in that place and it's really not suitable or safe. And there's no real escalation points for that beyond going to the police. And we discuss how that's not really a safe escalation point for either the perpetrator, particularly if there's something that needs to be supported there, or often for us because the police don't know how to support people. And it's a very 0 to 100. You have to be very committed to, I'm going to escalate this, I'm going to go to the police, I'm going to make a full-on human rights complaint. There's no point in the middle where these issues can be addressed. And of course, going that way then takes a toll on your mental health because of the way those processes are structured. So there's definitely a gap in those supports there. We also spoke about how people's support networks are not being supported as well, and that there's flow-on effects of both the mental health toll and things like hate speech on people's family, friends, partners. So, for example, people's close partners hearing this, getting really angry, but there's nothing they can do. And particularly against the backdrop of there being no real middle ground escalation points. Is there a safe way to escalate this? No, you've just got to sit with what's happening. So that has a toll on other people. And even for those who are supporting someone else, start to question whether you have done everything to support that person. But if nothing is effectively being done, then you may have done everything and nothing has improved, which is a really hard thing for you to process and takes its toll. Just looking back on my notes a bit, some of the ways this plays out in community is if community feels like there's a danger, they might change the way that we gather, might not be so public. And I'm particularly reflecting on my own experience as a trans person in that we sometimes don't do public gatherings. It's very word of mouth. So people who aren't already connected to community are further isolated, which is very difficult. So isolation is a real theme here. And when speaking about sort of whether you confront hate speech, you might not seek help because you just want people to leave you alone, and so you just cave in on yourself. So there's quite a lot of the impacts there, and some of the supports we talked about were really around that sort of middle ground. We need something that isn't going straight to police and something that actually addresses and educates perpetrators.
Thanks, C. And thank you to all our breakout room leads. Some really interesting conversations there. I'm hearing a lot of, at the same time as being denied agency and being denied totally, the expectation on people with disability to solve other people's problems with their perceptions. And it doesn't really make sense, does it? To be told you're not real, but it's also somehow your problem to solve other people's misperceptions and actions. A lot of harm in all of that. Now, we were supposed to open this session up briefly, but I just want to check with our hosts because we're running behind time. Do I still have time to throw this open and ask if people are noticing any connections and patterns or... Yep. So raise your hand if you would like to jump in and say something. Is there anything that strikes you as you hear the three areas, the connections between them or patterns, or is there anything critical that you feel hasn't been named yet? I'm assuming the magic machine will show me somebody's hands if there's a hand up, and I can't see one up.
So can I just offer a thought, like just listening to that, I think one of the conclusions that I sort of drew from it was that the idea that the harms may not be immediately visible, but that they might be a feeling by people that they need to self-exclude from spaces and take kind of preemptive, protective action. Like I kind of wonder what was it like to be a Jewish person in the 1930s where all of a sudden everything started going dark and you sensed like you don't want to make yourself a target. So there's this sort of thing that crept out for me from all three groups that people are making a decision to withdraw from spaces where they might paint a target on themselves and be subject to harm.
And the point Robin made in a legal sense that intention doesn't matter under the law, but even if behaviour doesn't reach the level of unlawful, doesn't matter how well-intentioned people are, they're still having the same amount of harm or just as much harm and leading to that self-exclusion that you're talking about. Yeah. All right, well, we might wrap it up there then. Thank you, everyone, for participating so openly in the conversations and sharing so much of your own personal experiences and views. Thank you to our three stream leaders and everyone who contributed to the discussions. We've heard in these sessions things that matter deeply, and we now have a much clearer picture of the real-world consequences of how hate speech and misinformation translate into discrimination, economic exclusion, and threats to safety and well-being. These aren't abstract terms. They're specific, they're measurable, and they're affecting people's lives right now. This session wasn't about finding solutions. It was about being unflinching in our assessment of what's actually happening and what's at stake, we do need to establish that clearly before we can talk meaningfully about what to do. And that's exactly where we're heading with the next session. Session 3 will ask, given everything we now understand, what needs to change? Not in general terms, but concretely, what can individuals do? What must organisations commit to? And what systemic changes are required? Susan Hellier will guide us through that conversation, and your input will directly inform a declaration that we're developing for public endorsement. But before we get started on session 3, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Thanks, everyone, and see you back here in 10 minutes for the next session.
And thank you, Sarah, if I may. Like, you stepped in to this pretty late in the day, into an MC role for this part of the session, and it's really, really appreciated. You've done it well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the support from the AFI team, as always.
See you in 10.
See you in 10.
Welcome to session 3, which will be convened by Susan. I
Hello,
think,
thank you,
hello.
Craig. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, I
Great.
can.
Well, hello, everybody. Lovely to have been part of this event. I too want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're meeting and pay respect to their elders past and present. I am Susan. I go by she, her. I'm standing in front of a whiteboard. I have a short grey hair. I'm mid-century, I like that term, and I'm wearing a black and white top. So this final session, welcome everybody. I think I counted there were 15 people still online after there were 60 at the beginning. So you're the stayers and we really value you continuing to bring your expertise and your reflections and your insights to this session. We're going to do something that really matters, which is we're going to assign the work coming out of all of the discussions of what we've heard. I'll just recap by saying in session 1, we established the reality of what we're dealing with. And we moved from asking, is this really happening, to understanding exactly how hate speech and misinformation and disinformation occurs and why it's accelerating. In session 2, we looked squarely at the consequences, thinking about ableist language translating into discrimination and exclusion, exploring economic impacts, like the barriers to employment, workforce participation, and what costs this is incurred by individuals and by the economy. And we also talked about mental health and safety and the cumulative toll of constant exposure to harms. What emerged through all of these three streams was clarity. The harm is real, it's measurable, it's being paid daily by people with disability. But it's not just people with disability who pay the price. When we normalise ableism, we weaken the protections and values that hold our whole entire society together. We undermine fairness, safety, and democratic participation for everyone. So I just want to put a reminder in about the support options that were listed in the chat a couple of times through this event. One of the things that takes a toll is coming together to build advocacy strategies. So if you're feeling that toll, please do make use of those resources. I want to be clear about what this session is and isn't. It's not a brainstorming exercise. What you'll see in the whiteboard copy that I've put into the chat is the synthesis of the information that's been shared and the brainstorming that's happened so far. We're also not generating a wish list. We're here to agree what action can be taken to halt hate and to find kindness. We'll be developing a declaration, an I-Day 2025 declaration that will articulate what a welcoming community is founded on and what it commits to, not in abstract terms, but with specific actions, clear responsibilities, and real accountability. So your job in this session is to bring your enthusiasm, energy, and ideas to help us test, refine, and strengthen the declaration. On the whiteboard, I've articulated three commitments at 3 levels. Things that individuals can do, things that organisations could commit to, and what systemic changes are required. So we're going to work through each of these 3 domains, and we're going to ask the questions about what gaps are there and is there a reality check we need. But you'll also notice on the whiteboard I've collated the insights around gaps and the reality check from the earlier conversations. So you'll see those over on the right-hand side of the page that you have in the chat, or if you're looking online, and you can, if your screen's big enough and the writing's visible, you'll be able to see it on your screen. So for each level, I've presented here some ideas that have were developed before the session today, some ideas that have been added from the sessions today. And I want to ask some questions
and so that we can think about, is there anything we need to add to this, but also then how do we prioritise this list for action in the coming year. The conversation we have now will directly shape the declaration that's going to be available for public endorsement. So what you say and do in the next 45 minutes really matters, because it will allow us to move from someone should do something to here's who could do what and by when. You'll see that the way that I've synthesized this information is in the individual level, we're thinking about enacting solidarity. At the organisational level, we're talking about building a social licence and safety in a whole lot of areas that are listed either within disabled people's organisations, in the business sector, in the public sphere, or in the wider community. And then in the final domain, the systemic domain, it's about fostering and demonstrating and enabling leadership. And we've got 3 areas there around policy and funding, regulation, legislation and enforcement, and infrastructure. The other thing I thought as we were talking, and happy for this not to be how happy to get feedback on this, but I thought what's happening is between the solidarity and the building social licence is a to and fro on shifting perceptions. And that as people act in solidarity, it starts to shift perceptions that then build the social licence of the organisational actions. But also as organisations take action, it also contributes to shifting perceptions at an individual level. The other thing thought that occurred to me was that as organisations do their work, it can lead a shift in practice in government, but as government does its essential leadership work, it can support shifts in practice back in organisations. So there's a toing and froing there as well. So where we might start is to just think about the individual actions. These are things that any one person could do, regardless of their role or position. They're sort of foundational commitments that create the conditions for everything else to work. And the theory here is that a welcoming community is built person by person, interaction by interaction, and that's certainly one of the things that's already been spoken about today. So the commitments up here are around calling out ableism, countering misinformation, amplifying the voices and perspectives of people with disability and disabled people's organisations. And to do that, we need to have 2 other foundation activities. Enabling capability development around recognising misinformation, disinformation, ableist violence, hate speech, exclusion and neglect, and also supporting people to believe the experience and building the community's capacity to believe these kinds of experiences. So I'll just do a bit of a check with you. And what I'd like you to do is you can put your comments in the chat if that suits you best, or you can put your hands up to share verbally. And I'm going to get you, Harry, to tell me. Oh, you can call out the names of people with their hands up.
Yeah, sure.
Great, thank you. So how does this look in terms of the kind of actions that we could expect of each other as individuals? Oh, thank you. Sam, I can see you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think individual action, there's that showing, the first follower video where people show people how they do something,
taking an action and making it really public. So whatever you do in your personal advocacy, make sure that you're making it public and you're showing other people what you're doing. If it's, protesting or writing a letter or whatever, just tell someone about it, put it on social media, and that way you're demonstrating, how you do something to other people and make sure that they can do it too. So I'm going to add that as to show as well as do. Yep, perfect. Thank you. Robin, I can see you have your hand up.
Thank you. One of the things that strikes me is that the sort of level of disbelief, it would be helpful for those of us who see what's going on and have a voice to bear witness into public spaces.
Thank you. Now you might see if you're looking at the whiteboard or at the piece of paper, I'm giving things either a dot or an asterisk. The dots are things that I think are around leveraging your position or your capability or your authority, and the asterisks are you being accountable, ways of being accountable. So that's what those things mean. If you're wondering what that layer of meaning is. Craig, did you have your hand up before?
Yeah, I did. Thanks,
you do.
Susan.
Yes, I can see you. Yep.
Yeah. I think so. So many of the people that are still here, the Remainers, we'll call them, not in the Brexit sense, but are kind of influential people in our own communities and in DPOs and in government advisory spaces. And I think the power that we hold, just building on Robin's point, is to sort of convince people that this is consequential and it matters, and there's an expectation that we hold that people will put this on the agenda as something that they need to do, respond to, and resource. Because otherwise, I think there's kind of issue that there's not a belief that compared to things like the NDIS changes and busyness, that this is a sort of maybe second or even third rank threat, whereas I like this threat assessment is wrong, I think is what today has got approved. And we need to find ways to escalate it as influential individuals in the rank of an order of priority of issues held by people in power who can do something and resource something.
So what I'm doing there is I'm adding another sort of action between the individual and organisation things, which is resetting the agenda. But I'm also going to add under bear witness, or I'm going to add in an action that's got an accountability label, which is around use position to tell the story. Are you comfortable with that, Craig?
I lost my thing. To unmute. To tell a story, but also permission to act on it and to resource this and to prioritise it within the work agendas of bodies.
Okay.
Like this should be something that's on the standing agenda, I think, of the advisory councils that are advising disability ministers now, is to say, look, we know this is a phenomenon. It's getting worse. We know we're going to drown in it if we don't do something about it. What are we doing? We should be checking back all the time, even when it's hard to do or bothersome, which it will be. There's so much noise in disability community at the moment, so many pressures, so many inquiries, so many frameworks around DRC reporting, so many halted, like reform pieces, that this, to get traction above everything else, we have to claw it to the top and be persistent.
Do is I'm putting that down as use influence to hold hate, and I'm putting that under a DPO responsibility.
Yeah, we'd like more DPOs than AFI to be focused on it, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other hands up? Carla.
I just wanted to point out that there's some comments in the chat that maybe we should read out.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm happy to do. So Sam says, record our stories everywhere, write about it in film, make art about it, record it in the way all good storytellers do, not just for posterity, but so others can be motivated by our fervor and passion and desire to make change for other people. Jess agrees, and breaking down of the stigma / misinformation will directly impact NDIS reform, etc. And then Griffin says, I think people need to start acting as though they were encountered disabled people in their lives, because they will. A lot of ableism is allowed to let fly because disabled people are still othered or treated as an outside of the normal population. We need to remind people that disability is common and that disabled people live and work around able-bodied people.
So I'm adding that in two places. I'm putting in under the organisation responsibility. The art sector is make art about it. And in under that same wider community domain, I've got there's a action around inclusive design, but I'm also going to put in there anti-ableism is normalised.
Perfect. And then Natalie says, for those of us who do have the privilege and capacity, setting precedents is important. We need to fight for our rights to create templates that work for those who don't have the ability to deal with it.
I'm putting that under create templates. I'm putting that alongside the show as well as do. Because I think they connect those two ideas. Yeah. Great. Do we have any other hands? It's a bit hard for us to see where we've got a I'm just gonna flip through. Yeah.
Jill King made a comment about the role of non-DPOs. I think that's worth exploring.
Yeah. So in the organisation domain, we have business, that is NGOs in the sector, NDS providers, commerce, and I'd also put it in the built environment because the world of businesses associated with that. We've got the public sphere, which is public events, institutions that are things like transport, hospitals, schools, green spaces, municipal, and police. And that's also where media sits and the criminal and civil justice system. And then there's the wider community. So what did you want to say about going beyond the DPOs, Craig? Or did someone else want to say something about going beyond the DPOs?
It was a non-unsubtle attempt to ask Jill if she wanted to speak to that. Sorry, Jill.
That's all right. It's the organisations, big and small, who are not DPOs, but who can be really good allies or should be really good allies, and who might be asking for similar or related things, but there's an awful lot that don't see that. So, for example, in the climate space, a lot of people don't see transport as a really big issue. And then even within the transport, in the transport space, both of them don't necessarily see the disability access and safety and inclusion and comfort as a really big issue.
Yeah.
And so, I'm convener of Living Streets Canberra, and we initiated an Act for Safe, Healthy, Active, Inclusive Streets shared policy. And as far as I know, we are the only organisation to do that, but we're trying to get other people to sign on board and trying to get that word out there locally, nationally, with other organisations, but it's and it's a crowded space for all of the advocacy, and particularly the grassroots advocacy organisations. And then when you add disability on top of that, that's an issue. One of the things that also needs to be sorted out or dealt with consciously is that, and it came up in the discrimination group, is that it's so much work for people with disability to be participating that they need allies to step up. But also there's that tension between allies speaking for people with disability, where it's got to be handled very knowledgeably and sensitively.
So what I've got up here, and I'm just going to check in with you how it needs to be added to or shift, is under the individual and act solidarity. We've got share the access labour, which was a lovely phrase coined in one of the previous sessions, and prevent insidious exclusion is the job of people who do not have disability. And over in the organisation area, I've got a section on demonstrating good practice, which is around complaints handling, reporting on actions, presence and embeddedness of people with disability, and safety-centric practices. And I've kind of pulled them together and said, and we need to build cross-organisation alliances on these activities.
Yes, and I think highlighting the stories and providing a means of allowing the stories to come up, providing the opportunities, the equipment, and so on. And I do remember applying for a grant to do that. Most of the grant was actually for a GoPro that could go on a wheelchair for people who couldn't hold their own phone or whatever, to actually show their experiences. And we were knocked back because we were not led by, it wasn't, the prime applicant was not a DPO, even though we were, it's tricky. And it's tricky when the DPOs are not in that particular space. It's hard.
So I've added story seeking and highlighting stories to that demonstrating good practice.
Yeah.
Sam, your hand's up again. Oh, sorry. I'll go to C because they haven't spoken yet.
Just building on what Jill was saying about whether there's something to ask of community advocacy organisations about committing to accessibility as a baseline ask in their advocacy rather than an add-on. It would take work, but as a commitment, it's something to work towards.
So, in the business sector, which includes NGOs in sector and NDIS providers, we have awareness and training on bias and capability. I'm going to have also put that in around baseline ask, which is that they understand the disability baseline ask. Is that?
It's, I mean, specifically around like advocacy organisations. So if someone is in housing advocacy, or I work in healthcare advocacy, across those different sectors, they might be considered a mainstream organisation, but accessibility, and which works towards anti-ableism ideally, should be part of their baseline asks.
Yes. So I'm going to add that in. We've got inclusive design, anti-ableism normalised, and inclusive design, I've got services, events, and activities. I'm going to add in that, I'm going to add advocacy there to that list as well. Taryn.
Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, sorry. Just adding to what C said, or just a dimension of that too, is just for in addition to the actual asks, just making sure that we do consultations and that we do our own engagement in a way that's accessible. I've been in a lot of and I think we don't, I will acknowledge we haven't always done that perfectly, but we do try, for example, to have hybrid events or to ensure that people, if we're having a consultation, that we are ensuring that it is actually accessible to a range of people. I've been to a lot of sector consultations, but also, I mean, it's just so frustrating, so many government consultations as well, where they are still not being done in a way that if you're not there face to face, you can participate. And I had hoped that with COVID that you know, that might change things, and I think it has a little bit, but it still hasn't fully. And it just means that you're from the get-go excluding voices that should be at the table, even that you have to constantly ask for that or it's seen as an exception. It just should be normalized. So yeah, so making sure that we're doing consultation to the extent that we possibly can in ways that are inclusive and enabling people with disability to participate.
So I've added that in as sort of subsets of that advocacy. It's about the consultation processes and the asks, but I think it probably also fits into that show as well as do, create the templates, and think about inclusive design in everything. Yeah. I think you get a turn now, Sam.
Thank you. I've got to go, but I just wanted to say, look, it's important to recognise that we don't have what we once had in terms of DPO representation in a competitive funding environment, you know, that frank and fearless representation that we once had is somewhat compromised by, you know, that competitive funding environment and the concern that we might not have any representation or that our voices might not be heard. But with recognising that, that comes other opportunities. So we have places like churches, you know, where if you look back at history and you look at T4 and you look at who spoke out for disabled people, and the right to life becomes suddenly important, even if we don't sit on the far right or conservative kind of groups. You know, that there's people who might actually value our lives who otherwise we wouldn't consider to be allies, you know, if we're not Christians. So we talked about people in group homes not being able to marry because they'd lose their pension. And all of a sudden, everybody in my Catholic session that I was speaking at a few months ago sat up and were horrified, you know, and they're the kind of allyships that we need to look at. So I think looking at other opportunities coming with loss is something that we need to look at, but also looking at unlikely allies and not just looking at money, looking at representation and voice. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam. I've added that in. I've added faith groups into the list of sort of public sphere institutions. And I've also added in a leverage point, which is find unlikely allies, e.g. churches.
Great, thank you.
In that organisation one. I think also then you were also talking about the access to resources and the contradictions in a competitive funding environment. So I'm wondering whether that's a good segue to think about moving over to the section we have on systemic actions, which, just as a reminder, that's around fostering, demonstrating and enabling leadership in system change. So what we've got there is government policy and funding and is one of the topics. So I'm thinking I want to add in here something about right to advocacy, which is part of the I'm just thinking the blueprint for not-for-profit. Can somebody help me with the what that document is? But there was like the blueprint for the policy and funding to ensure that the ongoing voice capacity and voice of the not-for-profit sector in shaping public debate and influencing government decisions. It seems to me that fits there, like that right to advocacy being sort of a key role that government has to fulfil. Does that capture what you're thinking about, Sam?
Yeah, I think so.
Thank you. Any other hands? I'm just going to see if I can flick through this and see if I can find anyone else with their hand up. I'm wondering,
there's a social compact here. There's a social compact here in the ACT as a framework for it. I'll just say something about, like, I think there's a kind of story which has emerged across the day about the sort of mutual obligations of individuals and organisations who are maybe under sort of attack in the culture wars, but are at different stages of it. So, like, I think it was really interesting and frankly harrowing to hear about some of the stuff Shannon was saying about people with intellectual disability being targeted by, like, these emerging TikTok videos. Now I'm not a person with an intellectual and cognitive disability, but I think that should sort of engender, an obligation for those of us that aren't under the most visible attack to be the ones that are speaking out first and prominently here. And I also think there's a thing about what are the obligations of organizations that are all and bodies and movements that are under shared attack. Like, I would say, if you're a disabled person that isn't speaking out about the attacks on trans people, thinking this will just pass you by, I'd say look at history. No, it's going to come for you as well. Like, this is a shared agenda. But I would also say, if you're in the LGBTIQA plus community or a gender community and you think, like Camille Paglia, that disability is sort of a false identitarian movement, well, actually, no. Like, this ableism can also come for you as well. Like, there's shared obligations between vulnerable communities in a time of crisis to form pacts of mutual aid, a bit like NATO. If one of us is attacked, the rest of you come to their aid, because if you add it all up, there's more of us. Like, there's disabled people and queer people and people of colour. We're the majority. That's what Trump and everyone's afraid of in the electorate, right? They know that they've actually white, pale, male, stale, honey, I'm home. That demographic has lost. It's no longer the majority. And that they're really, really afraid of that being action through solidarity, through class action, and through the electoral system. Because if we did, they wouldn't get away with it.
Yes, which might give some kind of, certainly the George megalogenesis analysis of the electorate before the last election was saying, actually, the old blocks of voters aren't big enough anymore to shift to shape the voting outcome. It's new. Professional women, second generation migrants are the two biggest voting blocks, whereas 20 years ago it was men in working class jobs.
The populists are good at wedging us off.
There's a shift.
The populists are really good at wedging us off. Like, the kind of populist movements are really good at, like, acquiring migrant communities and setting them off against each other. Like, there's our shared power is not being realised because very clever people are thinking about ways to ensure it's not going to happen.
So I'm going to do that as a leveraging thing, which is realise shared intersectional electoral strength. And not just elections, but as a member, as a group in the electorate, and yeah, having a scope to do that. Oh my goodness, there's some very long things being said in the chats. Yes, diversity should be default because that's what our society is. Flip the narrative, yeah, really powerful. Which goes to that conversation, sorry, I'm going to get back on screen, which goes to that conversation that I was listening to in one of the breakout groups, I think, or it might have even been in the plenary session at the beginning of session 2, which is some notes like ableist normalisation prevents recognition and action, causes micro harms and prevents flourishing. But the alternative would also be true. Do you know what I mean? Like the current gap at the moment is a lack of capacity and organisation around confronting ableism. And what it seems to me what's being talked about in the chat and a little bit on our in our conversation is some strategies to actually flip that conversation. Yeah, that respect and dignity and truth become the conversation, not ableism. I think there's an enormous amount of content that the team, the IDA team that will be pulling the declaration together, will be able to tap into based on what's on the whiteboard, what's in the chat, and what's been part of the broader conversation. So I think we're probably pretty progressed on that. I wonder whether I wanted to just go back to this, the initial thinking about the day, which is that it was going to be a reboot. And to energize and for people to find their authority and exercise their authority to make change. Can I just have there's a small group of you here now, so we probably have time to go about the room. But if we could just go about the room and say, sorry, I can probably see it on this computer better. We'll go about the room and we'll say, can you give a one sentence or less, can be just a phrase, of how you're feeling about your energy and authority to be part of a reboot? So I might start with, Ben, you're there with another person, so you're both welcome to have your one sentence. But how are you feeling about your energy and authority to be part of a reboot?
I mean, I always feel like I guess I'm quite an optimistic person, sense of possibility. But as you know, Susan, sometimes when you work in government, there's also a sense of constraint. So I guess I'm keen, and also with me is Nicole Moore, the Executive Group Manager for System Policy and Reform in Education.
Thanks. I'll chuck my sentence in. I'm feeling energized.
Oh, I just see you properly. I recognise you now.
It's been a while. Yeah, I'm feeling very energized, and I do think we have the authorising environment for a reboot in government. Obviously, there are constraints, but if we can't do it here, then I don't know how we're going to do it across the community. So, energized. We've got to do it.
Great. What about you, Corinne?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask me because I don't know quite what to say.
You don't have to say anything.
No,
you can pass.
I think I don't know that I feel I have a lot of energy at the moment, but that's probably for a range of reasons. It feels very hard in the moment at the advocacy space. But certainly I think, and I mean, I think today, I mean, it is also just that determination and that real understanding of the importance of pushing this issue. So that doesn't go away for me. I mean, that's always there. So maybe my energy waxes and wanes a bit, but just that understanding of the need and importance for this. What do you mean by authority, Susan, as that second part of this?
That's right. You've used up your sentence. You don't get to ask.
Oh, okay, that's good. Okay, that's all that I can say then.
What about we go to C?
I'm ready and raring to go, acknowledging we are all tired, but we've all got a little bit to give. So together, I think we can definitely do that despite the low energy at this moment.
Thank you. Jill.
Yeah, I'm a bit worn out, but I guess it's foundational in what I do. Always keen to make more connections so we can back each other up and share the work.
Thank you. Robin?
Well, given I'm an outpost, I'm very happy to try and share this work in Tasmania and think about how we can take up the issue of this, prioritising this as an area for urgent action, and also the crossover with other sectors. I do a lot of work across women, environment, LGBTIQA+, and disability, and religion. So, always happy to try and form those coalitions, because I think, as Craig said, we're in this together. We're all on the outside of, or the targets of those who don't want the world to change.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Emma. Energy and authority. In one sentence.
Sorry, what was that? Energy and authority in one sentence. I actually feel quite energized by this experience today. I think it's a really unifying approach to how to handle some of these really prickly and scary issues. In terms of authority, though, I don't fully understand, but I don't feel like I carry the authority, but I certainly feel like I'm better connected to those that do. I know that was more than one sentence, so I'll stop.
Thank you. Lou. Yep, that's you.
Sorry, I didn't hear Lou. I heard something else. I agree with everyone what's been said so far. I'm feeling very exhausted with the end of the year, but agree that we need to work in partnership with each other to keep each other strong and focused, and that we need to reach out and make new and different partnerships, or renew old partnerships that may have fallen by the wayside. And I include government in those partnerships as well as community and individuals.
Thank you. Dan. Oh, not there. What about you, Liza?
I am definitely feeling exhausted, and I feel a bit frustrated that there's still this focus on individuals. I'm really keen to see what gets put together for public endorsement, looking at business and systemic. I really enjoyed in our discrimination group talking about like what's needed, and I think systemically more monitoring, enforcement. So I know those things aren't easy, but that's definitely where I'd love to see some change, which takes individuals to advocate and push for. I do understand. So it is nice to hear other people feeling energized, because I think that sort of re-energizes me as well.
Super. Look, we've run out of time, so I'm going to finish pretty soon. But I did want to just say thank you to everybody, and sorry for the people who didn't get a chance to do their one sentence response. So, as said before, the declaration will be made available for public endorsement, and the IDA team will be asking individual organisations and institutions to sign on, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a genuine commitment to take action. So the work doesn't end today. In many ways, it's just beginning. We've established over these three sessions is that hate speech and ableism aren't inevitable. They're choices we can refuse to make. They're conditions we can change. And a welcoming community isn't something we hope for. It's something we build together with intention and accountability. So thanks everyone for being part of this conversation. Thanks for your honesty and your insights and your commitment to making all of this work and progressing it further. And I'll hand back to you, Nick, to formally close our event.
Thank you so much, Susan. And look, what an amazing day. Our first community-led I-Day event. And I'm sure you'll all join me in saying it's been a wonderful experience. I do want to thank some people, in particular, Craig, Carla, and the steering committee, and to all our panelists who spoke today. Thank you for giving up your time and sharing your absolutely extensive knowledge, and it's been invaluable. To everyone who participated today, thank you. I think it's the beginning of something very exciting in the years ahead. And yeah, so without further ado, it's now, let's get 6 minutes ahead of our time and close with our thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna and Kelly, for coming today.
Oh, thank you. I do apologize. Yes, of course.
Such a long slog.
Amazing interpreters, Auslan interpreters. Thank you very much.
And a huge shout out to Susan. Thank you for
Susan, I'm sorry, I've missed all of these people.
as well.
I do apologize. I haven't got a script in front of me, but it's been a terrific day.